The story begins in a building. A voice says he has been selected as a VIP tester for Real Online, the latest project from game developer L-Log. The boy is pleased, thinking he will finally be able to test the game. In front of him, there were some capsules. Then, a girl appears. Apparently, she was also ready to test the game. Meanwhile, the boy had already entered the capsule, beginning to fall into a trance. The girl did the same. Moments later, our boy wakes up. Looking at his body, he realizes he's wearing armor that looks very real. Even so, it's just a game. Meanwhile, a soldier aims with his bow and arrow, firing it at the protagonist. The arrow grazes him, but it was enough for him to feel a pain he finds unbearable. The next scene shows some numbers. A man says that test 33 was completed in 6 minutes and 1 second of gameplay. The other man then asks what the user's synchronization rate was. The answer is 100%, that all functions normal. It is mentioned that the last subject must be experiencing near fatal levels of pain. The man says there's no time for excuses, and that they must give a small taste of the hell that is this reality simulating game. Our hero got stuck in a never-ending cycle, unable to die that had only just begun. Time passes and the scene shifts to a school, with students happy about the start of winter break. A boy, meanwhile, watches the excited people. He wonders why there's so much excitement. Even so, he's sure that what awaits him is the trap of the academy instead of school the next day. Moreover, since he'll take the exam next year, the past questions from school will be harder. He thinks his life in that world has barely begun, and it's already boring. Then his phone rings. The person on the phone identifies himself as a delivery man, asking if the boy is home. He replies that he can leave the package at the door, but the man insists that it must be received in person. Our hero wonders what he received, saying he was already on his way home. In the next scene, he meets the delivery man. Looking at the box in his hand, he is surprised because it had finally arrived. The delivery man notices the boy and asks if he can see his student ID, but the protagonist just takes the package and leaves, leaving the man there alone. He thinks the boy is in high school, mentioning that they always go crazy when they receive a package with that game company's logo. In the next scene, the boy is already at home. Wasting no time, he goes to his room. He begins to open the box. He is surprised by the contents. Apparently, there's a virtual reality headset, along with other equipment. Next to them, there is also an instruction manual, showing exactly where each piece fits. Soon after, the protagonist had already put the equipment on his body, including the headset. Then he presses a button. A voice asks him not to move. Next, the boy opens his eyes, but his room remains the same. That voice congratulates him for becoming the true VIP online tester, and at the same moment, a girl appears. Surprised, he asks who she is. The girl then says that if he's surprised just by this in VR, he will be disappointed, calling our hero a member. She snaps her fingers and several lights begin to appear. In a matter of seconds, they were already in another place. They transported to a beach. The boy was so surprised he could barely speak. Then she introduces the protagonist to the game called Alad Korea, handing him an invitation. Our hero takes the paper, begins to open it, and a map appears out of nowhere. That was enough to leave him amazed by everything he was seeing. He wonders if it's really true. The scene shifts to another place with the boy saying that he became a tester for an amazing game from a company through a major competition. Hearing this, his father asks if he planned to be a tester or a tennis player and how many days he would have to dedicate to that. The boy replies that it would be 15 days and 14 nights coinciding with winter break. Also, he would be paid by the hour, but his father doesn't allow it. His son tries to find a justification, but his father has already decided. He asks where his achievements are, even though he's a third-year high school student who went to the mental field of the Navy, and asks if, by chance, he's going crazy. He asks how many times he has already told him to study. Hearing this, Lee gets irritated. He says that since he can't go, then he won't go. As he starts to leave, his father comments that he hasn't finished eating and asks where he's going. His mother, irritated, gets involved in the conversation, asking them to stop since Lee had already said he wouldn't go. Meanwhile, the protagonist goes to his room. His mother just watches. Lee, frustrated, thinks he can't believe he has to waste such a unique opportunity. And with a smile on his face, he thinks that obviously he won't do that. He states that he definitely has a plan. Thus, time passes again. The protagonist, leaving home, says he's going to the academy. Then he grabs his phone. Moments later, he's already on a subway. Lee calls his teacher, saying that his family will take a 15-day trip. The teacher asks where they would go, and Lee replies that it will be Canada. But the teacher finds it strange that his family would go to a cold place in that winter. Then the boy ends the call. He thinks the academy issue is already resolved. He also needs to prepare for the day his parents call the institution. But that's a problem for later, because something much more important awaits. In the next scene, the protagonist is already entering a building. He stands in front of the desired location. He thinks this will save him from his boring daily routine. Then, a man appears at the location, apparently asking the protagonist to leave. But then he shows his bracelet and the man recognizes it as the Virtual Kingdom invitation. Soon after, the boy places the bracelet into a kind of scanner, gaining permission to enter the place. Lee, surprised, begins to observe the people present. There were some rather unusual figures, but even so, it's pretty amazing. The boy looks ahead, confused by what he saw, but at that very moment, it disappears. Lee, curious, wonders what that was he just saw. And at the same moment, the long-haired guy reappears in front of him, smiling when he sees the protagonist. The boy then dodges the armored man. He wonders what that thing was, which then starts to chase our hero, launching an attack at the protagonist. Our hero asks him to stop, but it's not enough as the armored man continues attacking. But soon after, the girl from before appears, ordering that thing to stop, which surprisingly obeys her command. The girl says that it is a low-level enemy, concluding that there's no need to be afraid. Right after, she charges toward the monster, landing a few attacks on it. In a matter of seconds, the monster begins to disappear. Seeing this, the protagonist is surprised. He asks if the girl is by any chance the operator. Hearing this, she smiles and just nods. Lee is confused about the voice he had been hearing. The girl asks what's wrong with her voice. At that very moment, that woman begins to transform into a man, apologizing for what happened, mentioning that he should stop playing around since the boy's reactions have been quite dull since entering that place. Meanwhile, the people around laugh at the protagonist, who thinks that guy is humiliating him. But even so, it's still quite amazing. Then the man introduces himself as Guy, general manager of the test, but says his introduction was late because the boy had arrived late. Hearing that, the boy apologizes, thinking that he definitely wasn't late, and being removed as a tester for being late would be the worst case scenario. Guy says there's no need to apologize, asking if they should proceed with the scheduled demonstrations. Upon hearing this, Lee feels relieved that he won't be fired due to his delay. Heading to the location, Guy says that due to time constraints, he thinks they should take the office tour and consider the demonstrations later. He asks if that's alright, and Lee replies yes, saying the delay was his fault, and the manager says they should go straight to the testing room. Moments later, the two had already entered an elevator, and a man watching through a screen says he's sure he only trusted the client, asking them to go see that right away. Then, he ends the call. The old man says that at least the product to be sold at a high price should be properly prepared. Soon after, he picks up his controller, begins analyzing the protagonist on the screen. Thus, the scene returns to our hero, who was very surprised by all the things he was seeing. The other man begins to analyze some panel. After that, they go through a door. That other old man says this is just business. The scene returns again to the protagonist, who is entering through a door. Seeing what was in front of him, he is surprised, because it is totally different from the usual. He asks what that is, but Guy says he must see something first, gesturing toward another area, asking him to wait in the main room after putting on that thing, as he will come by later to check the final equipment. Seeing the equipment, the boy seems surprised. After that, Lee takes off his clothes. He begins to put on the equipment. He says it's really cool. Then he heads toward the door. At that very moment, a light begins to appear. He wonders what that is. Immediately, a girl appears. Not only that, but she's wearing the same outfit he is. She starts observing the protagonist, who is amazed by her beauty. He asks if it's like last time with his virtual reality glasses. Hearing this, the girl looks confused. Lee tells manager Ryung that this version of the operator is better than the last, especially the eyes. And the girl, still confused, asks what he's talking about. Lee moves even closer to the girl, asking how that shampoo fragrance was created. It turns out that it's not Ryung, who explains it's probably because the girl just washed her hair. Realizing what had happened, the protagonist is shocked. The girl, irritated, asks if he heard that, telling him to wipe that look off his face, or if he wants her to cut off his happy nose. Hearing that, our hero apologizes, saying he didn't mean it. Right after, he ends up bumping into one of the machines, falling into one of them. The system then starts verifying the user. Lee, desperate, doesn't know what to do. Meanwhile, the other girl starts talking to Ryung, asking what was up with that idiot. And Ryung says that due to a server problem, they had no choice but to merge the online and simulation servers. The girl asks if that guy isn't a civilian user, and if so, whether they've gone crazy. Hearing this, the protagonist asks why she keeps calling him a bastard. The girl goes on, saying that if the higher-ups find out he brought a civilian into simulator training, something bad will happen. Ryung apologizes again, explaining that because of the last accident, if they didn't merge real online with the simulator, it wouldn't work. Watching the situation, Lee thinks they should have started by now, asking why they're saying all these things he can't understand. Besides that, he wants to know where the manual is. And seeing the system window, he's surprised by what he saw, because there's definitely no simple game manual on the main screen. Then the girl asks if he's Lee, saying she has to do this with him because she definitely won't. Ryung says he understands, and if that's the case, from that day on, Maria can access simulator training. Hearing this, she goes silent. The protagonist stood there like an idiot, listening to the whole conversation, without saying a word until then. Ryung asks if it would be possible to cancel it, and upon hearing that, the girl gets frustrated. She starts grabbing her helmet, telling Lee to try to avoid that incident as she'll make sure he's disciplined. Hearing this, Ryung thanks her for her generosity. Maria then gives the middle finger, entering the machine where Lee was. Soon after, Ryung says he'll figure out the controls as he plays, telling Lee to get ready too. because the server is about to start operating. Some scientists begin some operations, about to start that specific game. After that, the capsule's close. Lee, meanwhile, just waits for the game to start. Beginning to feel heat, he wonders what's happening. Ring tells him not to worry, as the energy produced during the transfer between the program and the body will soon fade. Soon after, a man says the assimilation rate passed 70%. But it reaches 80%, our hero had already closed his eyes. Maria had done the same. Moments later, the assimilation rate hits 100% and Ryung says to begin, starting a countdown, concluding that the real simulator has been activated, and the two begin to teleport. Ryung, for his part, tells them to enjoy and wishes them a pleasant journey. In the next scene, the teleportation is complete. Our hero opens his eyes, realizing that it's raining. He thinks the rain is really strong and vivid, almost like real life. Not only that, Lee feels very cold. He's sure he was lying in the capsule, wondering why it's so cold. Besides that, he's dressed in armor. He even had a cape on his back. Looking around, he wonders where he is, because he's certain he definitely wasn't there before. In front of him, apparently, there was a castle. A man calls the protagonist General, saying that the enemy troops have reached the plains. Lee's confused about this so-called enemy, wondering if he wasn't supposed to be in the game tutorial. Another old man appears at the scene, also calling Lee General, saying that waiting aimlessly will cause unrest among his soldiers, asking him to hurry and give his orders right away. But Lee still didn't understand anything about what was going on. He thinks the level of that armor isn't normal, concluding that it's probably for a commander-type character. He asks if they didn't say it was the plains, but around the castle, there's only sea. Then the man says that even God would wish it were just black seawater. Lee is surprised, asking if that really isn't the sea, and if it's not, he wants to know what the hell that is. Looking closer, he realizes what it truly is, because in fact, it's an immense number of soldiers, dressed in their black armor. Not only that, but they were equipped with various kinds of weaponry. Lee asks if that number of soldiers really makes any sense. Hearing this, Gallenberg gets irritated, saying the general shouldn't be overwhelmed and even if it's difficult, should hurry and give orders to lead them. Hearing that, Lee is surprised. Saying he's already dying of anxiety, he asks why Gallenberg is yelling like an NPC. And looking around, he says there should be a console box nearby, wondering where the system window is. Meanwhile, the enemies kept advancing. That other soldier appears again, saying the enemies are already at the front line. Gallenberg shouts once more for his general. Lee says he doesn't have the game manual, wondering what he's supposed to do. The old man in turn falls silent. Pulling himself together, Lee says he can't just stand still and let them attack first, ordering them to form a battle line and for the archers to prepare to fire. Not only that, but they must keep in mind that they will fight to their last breath. After that, they give their war cry, and the archers fire their arrows, crossing over the wall, heading straight toward all those black knights, managing to hit some of them. But it's still not enough because the black archers were still standing, counterattacking with their own arrows, shooting toward the tower's defenders. Gallenberg, meanwhile, is surprised by the number of arrows. After that, he orders the men to raise their shields, managing to block some of those arrows. However, a large portion hits his soldiers, and those black armored soldiers keep advancing toward the tower. They were also carrying some ladders, probably to climb up the castle. They then use the ladders to do exactly that. But one of the Black Knights is surprised by something, because the other soldiers begin throwing rocks at him. Hitting him squarely, he begins to fall. As a result, he ends up crashing into some of his own comrades. The other old man, taking command, orders them to stop the knights and not let them climb up. The soldiers keep throwing rocks to destroy the ladders, but even so, the Black Knights persist in the climb. In the next scene, one of the enemies unfortunately reaches the top of the tower, defeating one of the soldiers. Lee, seeing all of this, wonders if this is really just a game. Looking at his body, Lee says that if this isn't real, it's something strangely close to it, questioning if he's in reality or not. Then a Black Knight aims with his bow and arrow. After that, he fires his arrow. Lee thinks he's in a world inside the game. At that very moment, the arrow grazes him. Seeing the wound, he panics. He says that if it's just a game, why does it hurt so much? He thinks he can't even tell if that intense pain is actually fake. The old man, irritated, orders them to protect the general immediately. Several soldiers take up defensive positions to protect the protagonist. Then several more arrows come again, heading toward Lee. He is desperate at the sheer number. However, the other soldiers manage to defend our hero, and many soldiers were there just to protect him. Lee was completely overwhelmed, wondering what kind of situation this was, thinking this must be a game bug. Not only that, but he can't even find the control window. He assumes he really is trapped in a place like that. Owen appears, asking what Lee is doing and informing that the enemy archers have stopped firing, orders everyone to return to formation. The soldiers then begin to obey. Lee remains on the ground, desperate. The other old man appears, asking how long he plans to stay like that and why he's not giving orders. However, Lee is totally confused about all of this. Lee remembers the ESC key on a computer. He orders to be let out of that place, saying he doesn't want to spend another minute in that kind of game. Hearing this, Gallenberg is surprised. He asks what the hell Lee is talking about. The scene then shifts back to the Black Knights, and a man among them says it's quite boring. He becomes thoughtful about something. Then he says the protagonist's name. After that, the man climbs down from his position, heading toward the castle where Lee was. With just a swing of his axe, he defeats countless soldiers, and he keeps going like that, taking down multiple soldiers at once. The old man beside the protagonist is stunned as he watches the scene, because countless soldiers on their side had been defeated. Not only that, the man even struck down soldiers from his own team. However, he doesn't seem to care about that, and then begins advancing again toward the soldiers, about to strike once more. Lee, seeing that silhouette, says he's sure he's seen it somewhere before. Then he remembers, because that's the same soldier who had chased him earlier. In the next scene, the soldier attacks the protagonist's men. They, in desperation, begin to run. But the old man tries to convince them to hold their position, saying if they retreat, they'll be completely annihilated. But in just seconds, the enemy was already in front of the soldiers, and the old man, seeing this, is shocked. But it's too late, because the enemy had already attacked. He asks if they really thought they could avoid that strike just by being prepared. With a simple swing of his axe, several soldiers are defeated. The same thing happens with Gallenberg. His comrades suffer the same fate. As a result, complete destruction follows. Only the protagonist remains in that place. The man, calling our hero by name, asks what he's doing and if he plans to keep hiding behind that pile of corpses. He mentions that Lee's father was even weaker than him, and he remembers how fervent his father was, but in the end he too is defeated. After saying that, the man draws his sword, and advancing toward Lee, he says this is all quite unpleasant. Lee is completely terrified, wondering if he's really going to die, and if, by any chance, this is how it ends. He thinks that if it does happen, maybe he'll finally be able to end the game. Then the man asks why he doesn't pick up his sword and get up. Hearing this, Lee is confused. He thinks he hasn't been killed yet. Then he looks to the side. He notices a long sword in front of him. The man says that attacking a child who isn't even holding a weapon is disgraceful for him, saying that at the very least Lee should die as someone who inherited his father's blood. Hearing this, Lee remains silent. He wonders what's wrong with this man, asks who he really is. Then the boy grabs the sword. He asks what the man knows about his father to say things like that. He declares that if this man is the villain in the game, he only needs to kill him. Then he raises the sword. In the middle of that moment, Lee wonders what this feeling is, assuming it's an unbearable explosion of rage. He supposes that's why he doesn't feel any fear now. Besides, the person in front of him destroyed his camp with just a few attacks. He says the man is truly a monster, and then the man responds that that's how it should be, because the look on the protagonist's face will make the battle even more interesting. Lee realizes the man is approaching. He says that since it's come to this, he will fight as Lee desires. Our hero, determined, is about to strike, but surprisingly, he drops his weapon. He thinks that, unfortunately, he missed the attack. Also, he's surprised because the sword wasn't even that heavy, and right after, he ends up injuring himself with it. The man says he's no different from a clown. Moments later, Kelm appears, saying that it's already over. The protagonist is on the ground, apparently unconscious. A scientist reports that the recorded gameplay time was 6 minutes and 1 second. Hyung asks what the subject's assimilation rate was. The next scene shows the protagonist, who apparently is still inside the machine. The scientist says the assimilation rate is 100%, and that he's certain the subject is experiencing pain similar to death. Hearing that, Hyung says that leaving him in a vegetative state will be enough for tonight. He orders them to prepare and upload the recorded video to report to the branch manager, and to reboot the system immediately. He tells them not to slack off and to let the other testers experience that real simulator called Hell. The next scene shifts to Lee's home, with his mother saying that his favorite dish is soybean paste stew. She asks if he's going to the academy without tasting it. His father, seeing Lee, says he's out of his mind and asks if he spent the whole night gaming again. Observing the situation, the boy is surprised, thinking he really returned to reality. Not only that, he also sees that chair where he always sits to eat. He also smells his mother's cooking, a smell he had missed very much. He concludes that this is the food he truly loves, which means he really has returned to his daily life. But then a drop falls into the soup Lee was eating. Rain begins to appear in the house. His father and mother are surprised, realizing that water is leaking from the floor above. Lee can't believe what's happening. At that moment, the ceiling of the house disappears. Lee, in despair, says this isn't right, wondering if it's an illusion, or perhaps a dream. Once again, he appears on the battlefield dressed in his armor. Lee thinks this has happened again. He was dragged into this hellish reality once more. Falling to the ground, the boy is frustrated, saying this can't be happening because he can't take it anymore. More arrows are fired in that place. One of the soldiers tries to warn the protagonist. The boy looks at the arrows. There were many heading in his direction. One of the soldiers rushes toward him, managing to dodge the arrows, but one ends up hitting his helmet, and the helmet is knocked off. Lee, seeing this, is surprised, realizing that the one who protected him was a girl. She then stands in front of the protagonist. He asks where she came from. Looking at her face, he thinks she's probably his age. She keeps observing our hero. He asks if she wants to say something. He thinks he shouldn't be distracted by this because there's something more important. Soon that monster will appear again. and he definitely has to do something. In the next scene, Lee asks the team leader to listen to him, begging to stop that game immediately. Hearing this, Gallenberg tells him to stop and give his orders because he's making the soldiers tremble with anxiety. He mentions that Lee is the son of that person, who has the ability to defeat Black Wayne. He asks if that's not true. Right after, the soldiers raise their swords, but Lee tells them to stop this nonsense, asking if they really think a regular high school student can fight that monster alone. He declares that he's not the general and just wants to get out of that shitty game. Hearing that, all the soldiers are stunned. That girl from earlier appears again, approaching our hero. She asks if that situation seems like a game to him, because it is definitely reality. To survive, they need to fight. And at that very moment, the enemy general appears. Lee is shocked by what he's seeing, and the man with a smile on his face approaches, and once again defeats the soldiers. Time passes, and the scene shifts to a man eating something. He says it's only a matter of time until they return to New York, and it's all thanks to Hyun, the team leader. Hearing that, Hyun says he's grateful, and the man comments there's just one thing left to handle, specifically Maria, that bold noble. Hearing this, Hyun agrees and says they're currently waiting for her to fall asleep. The scene shows the specific girl who remains inside the machine, and the protagonist is also still inside. Hyun says the simulator will end once Lipper finds the motivation. The man asks what will happen if Maria wakes up and whether it's impossible to run both at the same time. Hyun says that if the simulator malfunctions, it would be possible, but even so, they shouldn't let that small possibility ruin their ending. Hearing this, the old man asks what small possibility he's referring to, and whether by chance it's like that high school student, referring to the possibility of him defeating Black Yoon. Then Hyun says he understands, and at that moment, the protagonist calls out to him. He asks if Hyun can see him because he's aware he's being monitored. He says that if they can't remove him from that game now, they should at least boost his sword skills or basic stats. The other old man, meanwhile, just observes the situation. Hyun then mentions that possibility the branch manager was worried about, stating that it's basically zero. At that very moment, Lee is defeated again, taking a direct hit. As a result, he's easily overwhelmed. The scene shifts to Hyun, saying that the branch manager already knew this, because the kind of immortality Black Yoon possesses is different. And even if his DNA sequence were broken down, the fact that he exists as a catastrophe won't change. The old man says that's true, concludes it was an unnecessary concern, and suggests they finish the meal. The scene returns to the protagonist, who wonders how many times he's already gone through this, because he's faced death countless times, and this one specifically was him. He thinks that in the beginning, he was overwhelmed by fear and ended up vomiting. He always cried out for help, but no one came to help him. The boy begged for his life and was completely desperate. He ended up doing ugly things, something so cowardly and foolish. Constantly, he tried to escape that place, but despite everything, nothing happened. He couldn't defeat that damn man even once. He lost count of how many times he had already died, and still he kept dying. A flashback appears with the girl saying that to survive, they would have to fight. However, the protagonist thinks she shouldn't be saying that, because in his reality, playing meant going to the computer lab with his friends after class, and having dinner at the table with his family wasn't like this either. All of this had happened because of that Dan man. Remembering all those memories, the protagonist becomes angry, charging at that man, striking him with an attack. But still, it has no effect. The boy then gets hit, falling easily to the ground. The man says that before, when he spoke of his father, Lee used to be more impulsive. Getting up, Lee says that if he used to be that way, now he understands something. He asks the man to pay attention to his words because he will no longer be afraid of him. No matter how many times he's attacked, he simply won't avoid it. After dying so many times, he's sure he'll be able to kill him. He thinks it's the only thing he has left. Then the man attacks the protagonist, but he simply misses. A flash of light follows. Lee thinks that to survive there's only one way: to fight. But right after, that girl from earlier appears, saying he can't compare to that man even if he fights. She mentions she doesn't know how painful it will be. She asks if he'll still be able to keep fighting, but our hero is already determined to do so. Then the girl closes her eyes, opening them afterward, breaking the arrows that were coming at her. Lee, seeing that, is surprised. The girl calls out to Lee, saying he declared he would fight. Because of that, she will lead and defend. In the midst of that moment, Lee wonders why he should pretend to care about those data. He concludes that he'll no longer blindly trust or expect anything from anyone. Pulling himself together, the boy says he has no choice but to fight. Hearing that, the old man says the general has given his order. He commands the soldiers to prepare for battle. After that speech, the soldiers are determined, seemingly believing in victory, and a fierce battle begins on that battlefield. Lee, watching it all, seemed to be trembling. He thinks he's sick of this battlefield, but now he's slowly getting used to it. Then the girl appears, saying that if this is all the general wants, she can teach the basics of melee combat. Raising her sword, the girl begins her first lesson. Then she swings her sword, taking out several soldiers at once. She is apparently very skilled, continuing to advance across that battlefield, extremely focused on defeating her opponents. Lee, meanwhile, just watches in silence. because the girl was effortlessly defeating an immense number of soldiers. She says that even if he's at his limit, he must swing his sword to the end. In that moment, Lee thinks the girl is really strong. The old man says the real fight begins now and orders him to fight with his life on the line. The soldiers, determined, raise their swords, beginning to advance toward the Black Knights. Lee, meanwhile, watches the battle without moving a muscle, and at that moment, one of the Black Knights charges at him. The boy grabs his sword to try to defend himself. He thinks he actually managed to block an attack, but still he's confused about something. He wonders why he's hesitating in that kind of situation. Then the girl from earlier appears. She says that when he's wielding a sword, he must not hesitate even for a second. After that, she easily finishes off the Black Knight, who then falls in front of Lee. He thinks that if he wants to survive, he has to kill those guys. He keeps looking at the knight on the ground. Another Black Knight charges at the boy. He thinks that if he doesn't kill, he'll be killed, managing to land a blow on the knight, apparently having an effect, who is then easily defeated. Seeing all of this, Lee thinks he just killed a man and wonders if it was really that difficult. But then it's revealed that he also took a hit. He wonders if he's really going to survive in that place. Once again, that girl appears. Our hero looks back and is shocked by what he sees, because that girl had simply been defeated, and she asks him to never lose hope of returning home. Then she is finished off. All the Black Knights attacked at once. The protagonist could do absolutely nothing. He thought those NPCs were just assassination puppets created by Hyung, wondering if they even knew what homes were, because they didn't even have a reason to fight there. He asked her not to act like she knew everything, but the girl, after that, started to observe the protagonist. He was confused by that fixed gaze. She, in turn, tried to say something, but in the next moment, she ended up being killed, and Lee couldn't hear what she wanted to say. He wondered what she really wanted to say. Then the boy raised his sword. He thought he had no choice but to fight. As the girl said, as long as he could still fight, he would remain standing, swinging his sword non-stop. Now, the only thing he needed to do was kill one person, even if it was just a single strike. Only then would he get closer and closer to returning home. In the middle of that situation, our hero ended up surrounded, and all those soldiers attacked him at once. As a consequence, a new simulation began, and the battlefield went back in time. The protagonist kept repeating that battle cycle countless times, continuing to defeat numerous soldiers. However, in that timeline, it was different because he managed to kill 3 people, feeling glad because he really managed to kill him. But after that, the boy unfortunately ended up being killed and went back in time again. Lee's goal had always been to kill at least one person each time he returned in time. He thought he was definitely getting used to all of that, and the weight of the sword seemed easier and easier to handle. He could easily start swinging it. Also, the feeling of defeating his enemy was becoming increasingly familiar. Thus, a lot of time passed, and the boy spent a long period on the battlefield. He wondered how many people he managed to kill this time. As the round progressed, his strength and stamina increased, and fortunately, these increased attributes did not reset even after his death. He stated that this was certainly a good thing, but still wanted to know why he didn't feel even a little happy. Then someone called Lee. The boy recognized that it was that girl from before. She apparently tried to say something to Lee, but at that very moment, she ended up being struck by several arrows. Lee, in turn, thought that ending had repeated many times. Even so, it was to be expected, because she was just an illusion made in that horrible place, but he wanted to know why it was bothering him so much. A long time passed after that, and the simulator had already restarted a total of 65 times. An immense number of people were already dead on the battlefield, and our hero kept defeating many of them, counting each person he managed to take down. He thought that during all that time, he used to consider himself lucky for being able to kill some of them using his sword skill. Then a massive number of black soldiers advanced toward him. The boy, in turn, noticed this. Right after, he grabbed his cloak, putting it over himself, apparently managing to defend himself from those arrows, absorbing all the impact. The protagonist, after that, smiled, preparing to go after the other soldiers, thinking that little by little he was getting better, delivering multiple strikes to those other soldiers. Another knight tried to land a blow on him, but Lee dodged it easily, counterattacking with a spear, managing to immobilize the enemy. But even so, there was another knight behind him, about to attack our hero. However, he had foreseen this as well, managing to finish off the opponent with his sword. One more knight appeared from above, attacking Lee from behind. The boy successfully defeated him with his sword. In the middle of that situation, the protagonist was already getting tired, starting to approach one of the soldiers who was on the ground. Holding his sword, he was about to finish him off, thinking that he was sure he was getting stronger and stronger. Besides that, there was something else, because even though everything was a mess, he still hadn't been killed. Looking around, the boy was confused. He wondered since when he had become the last one still standing on that battlefield, wanting to know what happened to that old man who liked to shout loudly. He also remembered that annoying red-haired knight, concluding that not a single ally was left standing. He wondered if they were dead or if they might have fled. Still, it didn't matter anymore, because from the beginning, that fight had the purpose of returning home, and it was probably a fight of his own. In the next scene, several soldiers advanced in Lee's direction. Our boy noticed this, and the enemy observed the protagonist with a smile, advancing toward him and seemingly handing something over, which fell in front of Lee. The boy, seeing that, was surprised. Observing the expression of our hero, the soldiers began to laugh. It was revealed that what was on the ground was that girl from before. In the middle of that situation, our hero said he was sure he had been alone before, concluding that he didn't know that girl had been in that place from the beginning. He wondered what she might be thinking. Right after, those soldiers advanced on Lee, defeating him easily. A long time passed after the battle, and the simulator reached its 97th restart, and the protagonist asked the girl why she was smiling like that, the reason for smiling at that specific moment. But hearing that, the girl didn't understand anything. Meanwhile, she was pulling a spear out of her stomach. Our hero, seeing that, went silent, realizing that the girl was apparently badly wounded. Then Lee said that just before she died, just like now, she always smiled before being killed, asking the reason why she always did that, and why she always kept protecting him instead of running away. If she thought he would treat her differently just because she was by his side. Hearing that, the girl was surprised. Lee asked what she was looking at since he was talking to her now. Our hero, in turn, ended up realizing something. Then that girl grabbed a shield, protecting Lee from some arrows. Then she hugged the protagonist. The two managed to defend themselves amid that immense number of arrows. Lee said that was madness, asking if she wasn't going to say anything. However, the girl remained silent. Lee thought he was trapped in this endless nightmare cycle of death and realized he had no allies in that cursed place, concluding that he definitely shouldn't trust anyone. However, there was something different, because that girl wasn't normal. She kept moving in a different pattern with each cycle, and it was as if she didn't belong to this world. He wondered why that only happened with her. He also wanted to know what she always wanted to say before being killed. No matter how many times he asked or yelled at her, she simply never answered once, concluding that he had no choice but to change his tactics from then on. In the next scene, several arrows flew toward the two of them, and the protagonist was about to take the hit alongside that woman. A long time passed, and the simulator restarted 137 times, and the old man said that the enemy army was moving toward the flat area. However, our hero remained silent, thinking he didn't care about them, calling them bastards and cowards. At that exact moment, there was only one thing that mattered to him: starting to approach that girl, starting to stare at her, ordering everyone to listen because he would be on the front line during the enemy attack. And hearing that, everyone was surprised by what he had said. The other girl tried to interfere, saying it was madness. However, our hero was already determined to do it. The girl then fell silent. Lee said that no matter what happened, he would be on the front line. Observing that girl's expression, he wondered why she looked so worried. He could also fight now, and even more, was capable of keeping up with the battle endlessly, concluding that he would fight to the end. After that, the old man told them to follow the general to the battlefield. The soldiers were determined for that battle. Right after, those black knights began to advance. They were also carrying some ladders, starting to use them to climb the tower. However, it wasn't enough because stones were thrown to stop them. Even so, some soldiers managed to climb the tower, eliminating some from the protagonist's group. The knights who made it up determined kept advancing. But Lee didn't give up, saying that this time he would definitely get those bastards. His companions watched the situation, remaining silent. Our hero, in turn, looked back, thinking that he was going to hear what that woman had to say and discover her true identity. Also, he could finally break that pattern of events and finally come out of that whole mess alive. The protagonist's companions watched him, apparently surprised. That other girl then began to move, advancing to help Lee. He thought that, in order to reveal that woman's identity, he would survive. The soldiers became determined, beginning to advance toward the Black Knights. A battle began. Time passed, and Lee thought that those chickens, who kept calling him general, had already been killed. Or maybe am I gonna flood from that place? Still, it made no difference, because he didn't care about any of them. Our hero looked to the side after that, realizing that girl remained on the battlefield. But then a man appeared behind her. In a matter of seconds, a sword was thrown, hitting the man who was behind her. It was revealed that it was Lee who had done it, thinking that this was the moment. The girl, seeing that Lee had saved her, remained silent. Lee, in turn, thought that was the moment when the two of them were the last ones standing on that crazy battlefield. He began to approach his companion, thinking that something was about to happen soon. Right after, the boy stretched out his arms, starting to protect her. She, confused, asked what the general was doing. However, Lee ignored her words, thinking the arrows would fall now, saying that she always died first, so he never got to hear her final words. In the next scene, Lee was struck by several arrows. The girl remained silent. However, the protagonist had not given up yet. Lee said that this time would be different, asking if she knew why, because he wouldn't let her die before him, ordering her to speak her final words she had been trying to say, and he also wanted to know her true identity, and what exactly she was, concluding that he simply wouldn't let her die first. The girl was surprised, asking what the general was doing. Those arrows then finally struck them. The protagonist was hit by all of them. The girl kept watching our hero taking the entire barrage of arrows. He continued to order the girl to speak already, asking what were the last words she was trying to say, and beyond that, he wanted to know her true identity. However, she still remained silent. After that, she stood up, grabbing the protagonist by the collar of his shirt. Then she hugged him. Lee, confused, asked what she was doing. She then turned to the other side, where she ended up taking all those arrows in the boy's place. After that, she collapsed. Lee kept holding her, asking what she was trying to do. The woman was about to say something. Lee, meanwhile, thought that once again he failed to hear her final words. However, he could guess what she had been trying to say, because she just wanted to protect him, asking if that was really true even when she always ended up like that, asking why she was always trying to protect him that way, concluding that still he didn't even know her name, thinking that he had kept denying and denying it over and over again. But before he realized it, maybe he had allowed that woman to become his ally unconsciously. Then that old man appeared, saying that the enemy legions had reached the plains. The soldiers remained still. Lee, meanwhile, thought there was something that made him curious. Approaching that girl, Lee thought there was something that made him very curious. He wasn't going to ask about her true identity anymore, but instead something else, because he actually wanted to know her name. Hearing this, the girl was surprised. Lee, in turn, wondered if he had done something to make her feel stunned, saying he didn't want to know anything else so she could tell him that. Lee thought he didn't know why, but after going to that hellish place, it was the first time he had smiled. Right after, the girl began to speak, saying that she definitely didn't have a name, leaving him surprised by what he had just heard, saying that was nonsense. Right after, the protagonist looked back, asking what that reaction was from the man behind him. He asked if the general was pretending not to know if by chance he had forgotten, because that was the elite soldier, and in other words, she was just a war tool and nothing more than that, concluding that it wouldn't be strange if that girl didn't have a name, asking the general not to worry about such small matters. However, the protagonist told him to just shut up, and both were surprised by what Lee had done. He then said that she was his knight, asking who he was to treat her like a tool, thinking that even when everyone else betrayed him, she still remained by his side until the end, even if she was just a bunch of data programmed to do so. However, that expression he was seeing was different. Looking at the girl, the boy said she was different and wasn't like the rest of those bastards, asking why she was like that. Hearing this, the girl remained silent. Then she said she wasn't that different, stating that she was just one of the general's soldiers, the same as all the others. Hearing that, he smiled, thinking that she gave that answer again, but it was exactly what he expected. Then that old man said that the enemy legions were advancing toward the plains. Our hero, in the middle of that situation, thought that it didn't matter, because from that moment on he had to face those endless deaths again. That battle happened once more, which probably would happen countless times. In the middle of the battle, he wondered what that was, because his heart was beginning to race. He wondered if it was because of fear, but in truth, it felt different this time, concluding that it might be nervousness, because that energy was stirring deeply inside him and felt like it was about to explode. He supposed it could be the rage he had accumulated through all these reincarnations. Still, it didn't seem to be that either, because it was as if an unknown power was writhing within his body. Meanwhile, all the soldiers were stunned by what they had witnessed. Next, the protagonist told them not to retreat because if they had the strength to run away, they still had enough to kill a few enemies. A blue aura, meanwhile, continued to surround our hero. The soldiers simply couldn't move. Then the old man asked if they hadn't heard the general ordering them to block and fight for their lives in that game. The knights, surprisingly, did what Lee had said, and then he approached someone else, asking the girl to listen carefully because that order was given to her alone. Without wasting time, the girl knelt down. Lee said that from now on, she was not to dare die before him. Hearing that, she was surprised. Lee said she definitely must not break that rule, because if she did, he would kill her himself. Our hero then began to walk away, thinking that she had to stay alive until the end. Without hesitation, that woman got up, grabbing her sword. Among all those soldiers, the protagonist told them to get out of his way because he would be leading the charge, thinking that somehow he felt he could do anything, and it didn't matter whether there were 1 million or 10 million enemies. And with a war cry, he told them to go now. The system announced that the battle would begin in 60 seconds, and meanwhile, several people were watching the protagonist on a large screen. The battle then began, and within seconds, our hero leaped. The man watching the broadcast was shocked. While yawning, he said he had almost forgotten. He continued observing the computers. Beside him, some scientists were discussing something. Another man asked if the simulator was still running. He responded that no matter how hard the subject was, they should have had a complete mental breakdown by that point. But when he looked at the screen, he was extremely surprised, calling his team leader, because he definitely had to see that. The scene then shifted to the black soldiers, who were shocked by what they saw. It was revealed that the protagonist was still fighting in the middle of that place. With a threatening gaze, he watched all his opponents, starting to advance and defeating every one of them. The scene shifted to their commander, asking what it was he was seeing. Looking at Lee, who was in the middle of that battle with a completely different look in his eyes, asking what the hell that was. Meanwhile, that general from before remained alive in the battle, continuing to defeat countless enemies. The old man watched that girl, asking who she was, and who had added the night data into the simulator, thinking that the data they had never programmed was still inside the simulator, not believing what he was seeing. He supposed that was an irregularity, thinking that to maximize mental collapse, each repetition of death allowed the senses to vividly experience the pain of dying. And in that real hell, there were significant risks, but still, they had never failed to market it. However, he wanted to know what would happen if there was someone who managed to overcome that infinite death loop, concluding that if, in that process, they managed to compensate for all their deaths and suffering, they would end up achieving an absurdly powerful strength. So it wasn't that pain was impossible for a high school student who didn't even know how to program. The next scene showed the protagonist, who was still inside that capsule. The man then began to observe him. The scene changed to the simulator, and Lee remained in the midst of that battle. A sword struck the man who was behind him. It was revealed that it was that general girl. The man, meanwhile, continued watching Lee, who thought it meant that this irregularity had some kind of decisive positive influence on that boy's mindset, ordering them to separate the two immediately and then erase all data related to that woman. The scientists then began to carry out the man's orders, but they were surprised by what happened. Perfect. Let's continue with the same process. Several codes appeared on the computer screen. The scene shifted to our hero, who wondered what that was, because he could see everything happening on the battlefield. Surprisingly, everything in front of him was moving in slow motion. Further ahead, there was a man aiming with a bow and arrow. He then released his arrow, heading straight toward our hero. He thought that he had finally understood everything, because it was all starting to become very clear to him. He then managed to dodge that arrow. Our hero grew thoughtful about something, stating that, just by the sound of breathing, he could feel that the nameless knight was behind him. Not only that, she was following his order to the letter. The boy then smiled, beginning to prepare for battle once again, determined for what was coming. A black knight charged toward the protagonist, and he wasn't alone. He held 2 spears in his hands, about to attack our hero. But Lee counterattacked easily, destroying those spears. Lee's companions were also stunned by what they had just seen, because the boy had managed to stop 2 spears with ease, catching them with his hand, completely immobilizing that black knight. After that, the knight fell to the ground, surprised by what he had just witnessed. Still staring at the protagonist, our hero swiftly finished him off, thinking that from now on, something was about to happen. After that, he leaped, concluding that he was ready to face anything on that battlefield and that he would return home no matter what. Then he unleashed an attack toward all those soldiers, who were all struck at once. Another black knight opened his eyes, but Lee was already right in front of him, finishing him off effortlessly, continuing to defeat countless more enemies. That other general was doing the same, apparently following the order our hero had given earlier. The two of them seemed to be in sync, defeating numerous black knights, and it wasn't even clear whether it was the black soldiers or the protagonist group that had the advantage. Thus, time passed once more, and that sword kept cutting down countless enemies. Our hero remained on that battlefield, still surrounded by that distinct aura. The soldier in front of him stayed frozen in despair at what he was seeing, but in a matter of seconds, he was defeated by our hero. Lee wondered if, once again, it was just the two of them left, beginning to observe his companion, who apparently was tired. In the middle of that situation, Lee wondered how many people he had killed. It could be dozens or even hundreds. Moments later, the scene shifted to the scientists working on their computers. That same old man was also watching them work. The scene returned to the battlefield, and Lee wondered why the enemy count seemed to be definitely increasing. Then the girl asked her general if he could still fight. The protagonist was surprised, wondering if what he was feeling was warmth, stating that he was aware it defied common sense, but he could feel an inexplicable warmth being transmitted through the points where their armors touched. Then the boy said that even if he couldn't, he had to do it, thinking that this was a place where he wouldn't be able to survive even a second unless he kept fighting. Then the girl said that fighting is hard work. Every person, regardless of the peaceful life they appear to live, has their own battlefield hidden in their heart. Hearing that, our hero was surprised, beginning to reflect on it. A flashback appeared in his mind from his school days. He seemed to not have many friends at school, but he really enjoyed gaming. Right after, the girl said that it was very easy to lose a fight in that place because you could simply give up. Our hero kept listening to that conversation. In the middle of that battle, the general said that giving up was such an easy decision to make, but at that moment, everything would come to an end. However, if one held firm in their resolve and fought until the bitter end, that battlefield within them would persist until that same end. Hearing that, Lee thought that was why, despite the countless deaths he had experienced, he could still stand strong against enemies in a place like that. And beyond that, there was always someone behind him he could trust. After that, Lee asked why she always trusted him, thinking that, as always, he was sure he wouldn't get an answer, but still wanted to ask, saying he definitely wanted to know that, begging her to answer, thinking that to him she'd become a battlefield he couldn't give up on. The general remained silent. Lee thought he didn't even need to turn his head to see that expression to know, thinking that his senses had become so sharp he could feel it coming, concluding that it was the pattern they could never break, the arrival of the era rain. After that, Lee said she still hadn't given him an answer, asking if that meant she was going to give up. Then the arrows began flying toward the protagonist. The general still said nothing. Right after, she surprisingly let go of her sword. Lee thought that in that moment, the girl's steps were steps he had never seen before on any battlefield, because they were free of any unhappiness and hesitation. He concluded that it was as if she had run out of time. After that, the general embraced our hero. He thought those steps were taken solely for his sake. Moments later, the girl was struck by a barrage of arrows, saying she would never give up, just like her general. Lee was surprised, thinking he had gone through an endless loop of deaths and thought he had become familiar with that battle. However, there was one thing he still hadn't gotten used to. Wondering what the girl was doing now, beginning to shield her from the arrows that were approaching, ordering her never to die before him. However, that woman already seemed to be severely wounded. Even so, our hero hadn't given up, protecting her from all those arrows. Time passed once again. Lee continued defending that girl, not giving up for even a second. The general tried to say something, asking him never to give up on his life. After that, she let go of the protagonist. The scene shifted to that old man, who continued watching our hero, smiling as he observed everything. The scene returned to the battlefield with Lee begging her not to die, still holding on to the girl. Then he carried her on his back, asking her to open her eyes because he knew she hadn't died yet. Remembering what she had told him, not to give up. She had also told him to hold on until the end so their stories would become eternal. Just like she said never to give up, he would never give up on her. With tears on his face, he ordered her to open her eyes. The girl remained silent, but shortly after, she began coughing up blood. Lee was surprised, realizing she was still alive, begging her not to die, because if not for herself, then at least for him. The Black Knights continued to approach. The boy was severely wounded, begging to be able to move, thinking that no matter how tired he was or how much his muscles screamed, he definitely had to move. That aura appeared around our hero again and he thought he was going to survive. Determined, he gripped his sword, thinking that no matter what happened, he would stay on his feet. Something unknown happened to Lee. With a threatening gaze, he kept his eyes on all those soldiers, all while carrying the wounded general on his back. Lee told her to open her eyes and hold on, thinking that he would save her, no matter the cost. In the next scene, countless Black Knights continued advancing toward the two, ready for any battle, with massive smiles on their faces, because the protagonist along with that woman was already heavily injured. The scene shifted to that same old man who continued to watch them. Lee, while carrying the general, realized how badly wounded she was. Thinking that there was no time to hesitate and to survive, he needed to hurry and move fast. However, there wasn't a single drop of strength left in his body. The soldiers continued advancing toward the boy. He kept trying to move, even though he was completely exhausted and his muscles weren't functioning. But at the same time, his body felt excruciating pain. Along with that, though, came an indescribable power that was being born inside him, and apparently, he managed to stand up. Without wasting time, he began swinging his sword, defeating countless soldiers all at once, running across that battlefield like a beast, determined to survive. The old man continued watching his computer, wondering what that power was. The scientists said it was difficult to identify the cause, wondering what was going on. The computer system reported that the player's combat level had exceeded the allowed limits. He kept defeating a massive number of enemies with every step he took, all while carrying that general on his back. The Black Knights were terrified by our hero's power, who, despite everything, remained injured. Then, surprisingly, the general began to speak, saying that before it was too late, there was something she had to do, asking if he would at least give her a name. Hearing that, Lee was surprised, saying he would give her a name later. However, the general shook her head, saying that if he gave her a name now, she would never forget it. Our hero fell silent. Then he looked at the sun, saying that her name would be Sepia. From now on, that would be her true name. Hearing this, the general smiled, saying that it was a good name, because it reminded her of the sunset in her hometown. Right after, the girl seemed to lose consciousness. The protagonist grew furious and then let out a scream, thinking that he would never give up on her. The soldiers were stunned, realizing that the aura had disappeared, beginning to rush all at once toward our hero. He then received several attacks at once. The scene shifted to those scientists and a system alert appeared, concluding that simulation number 138 had come to an end. That old man continued watching through the computer, thinking that somehow the boy had managed to kill him that time. But he hadn't expected the boy's growth to be so explosive. Next, the scientists called out to the old man, who asked what happened this time. They said they had found a way to separate that girl from the protagonist. The scene shifted to Lee, who thought he had managed to save that woman, but he had finally been able to use that strange burst of energy. However, it wasn't enough to break through the enemy's line. After that, simulation number 139 began. That same old man said the enemy legions were advancing. Lee, determined, thought that he would definitely save her. Lee then opened his eyes, calling out for Sepia. Hearing that, the soldiers didn't understand what was going on. The protagonist kept calling for Sepia, thinking she had said she would never forget that name. The knights remained still, but soon after they seemed to grow hesitant. Still, Lee didn't care about that, continuing to search for the girl. In front of him, there was a sword on the ground. Our hero remained motionless, yet he didn't give up, still searching for her, only leaving his companions more and more hesitant. The other man asked the general who he was looking for. In the middle of that situation, the man thought it was embarrassing to call the protagonist a general, because he was someone who had taken on the mantle of a much greater predecessor, basically an empty shell, a cowardly piece of trash who frequently ran away. That was the Lee he had known. But even so, he no longer understood what was happening with the boy standing before him, because he was radiating an authority only a true general could possess. Right after, the protagonist asked again where Scipia was. The general said only God would know who that person he was looking for was. Our hero grabbed the man by the collar of his shirt, leaving the soldiers even more hesitant. After that, they drew their swords, pointing all of them at Lee. He said he was well aware they preferred following that old man rather than him. He also knew that old man considered him a dumb and cowardly mutt. Even so, he still wouldn't accept it. Still holding that old man by the collar, the old man apparently was struggling. Meanwhile, the other man was surprised, thinking that, including the armor, Lee had to weigh over 100 kilograms, and even so, he had lifted him so effortlessly. On top of that, that man was the captain of the knights and a member of the order who could manipulate a portion of Terra. Then the protagonist said it didn't matter what they thought of him because there was only one thing he wanted to know. Asking once more where was Scipia. The red-haired man thought Lee had really gone mad, wondering who the hell that person was he kept mentioning, saying they didn't know what he was talking about, but first he needed to release the captain, pointing his sword at the protagonist. Lee then smiled, staring at the man. Surprised, the knight wondered what was going on with that insanely intense bloodlust. Then Lee let go of the old man. At the same instant, he charged forward, specifically toward the red-haired man, grabbing him by the neck, saying it was actually he who should answer that question. The old man was stunned, thinking it was impossible for Lee to move like that. At that moment, Lee kicked the old man in the face, sending him flying. The soldiers, seeing that, remained silent. The old man began to fall to the ground. Lee said that the Scipia he was looking for was not a civilian, because she was someone that trash like him couldn't even compare to, thinking that his only companion in that endless battlefield was her, and he was talking about the owner of that longsword. Then the old man began to look at the sword, asking if he was referring to number 232. Hearing that, the protagonist remained silent. That blue aura began to envelop his eye. The old man just watched in silence, thinking about that shadow that was drawing closer to him at that exact moment, wondering if he really was the direct descendant of the coward he used to know, because that presence resembled the supreme commander of the empire. The protagonist extended his hand, saying her name was Scipia, not number 232, and asking where she was at that exact moment. The man replied that he only knew she was in the infirmary. Hearing that, Lee was surprised, wondering why she was in that place, ordering the old man to take him there immediately, and so time passed once more. Our hero began to approach a door. After that, he opened it, starting to call out for the girl. However, when he looked inside that place, there were only wounded soldiers, and there was no one named Scipia. But soon after, the boy noticed a woman lying in a bed. He was surprised by what he saw. Without wasting time, he started approaching the girl. Then he stood in front of her. Confused, he wondered what was happening. The girl appeared to be unconscious. The other nurse asked what the general was doing and what had happened to that person. The nurse apologized, saying she couldn't find the cause either, concluding that the girl had been there for 10 days in that same state for quite a while. Our hero was shocked by what he heard, thinking that just a moment ago they had been fighting together, and now she had been lying there for 10 days. After that, he smiled, thinking that this was the kind of place where Hyun might pull tricks like that, saying that one day she would wake up. However, the nurse said that giving a definitive answer was very unlikely, and asked the boy to lower his voice while in that place. Our hero grew thoughtful, wondering if he would ever see her open her eyes again. The nurse continued to observe Lee. So to the other medical staff, the soldiers outside were also confused. Then the nurse said he might be able to see the girl again. Lee looked back. The nurse said that if he were the Virgin Mary, he would be able to do that, because only she could treat any kind of illness. And if he could take that woman to the Virgin Mary, she was certain she could be saved. Hearing that, Lee was confused about everything, asking what he should do to find her. Time passed again, and the Black Knights were already placing their ladders on the tower, starting to climb that place. The battle began immediately. The scene shifted to that nurse who said there was only one way to find the Virgin Mary, and that was simply by winning that battle. In the midst of that situation, the protagonist thought that now he definitely had a reason to keep fighting. Outside, the Black Knights kept advancing, heading straight toward the protagonist who said he wouldn't give up until he won, thinking that to return home and to save Scipia, nothing else mattered, unleashing a barrage of attacks on those soldiers, who were easily defeated. The boy said he would fight until the end, but Black Knights continued to charge. Still, he was already determined to defeat those enemies, thinking he was just starting to warm up. An explosion occurred in the castle after that, cracking part of it. Several soldiers were thrown into the air, starting to fall in free fall. It seemed Lee had been the one who caused that. Even so, there was still a massive number of Black Knights lying in wait, charging directly at the protagonist. He then raised his sword, using it once more, charging at those other enemies. His companions, seeing the battle, were desperate, apparently beginning to flee in fear. However, the protagonist still remained standing fighting. Looking to the side, the hero was surprised, noticing that old man who was also fleeing. And not only him, but the red-haired man was there too, amid the crowd of enemies. Our hero watched them, apparently with disdain. At that moment, another black soldier rushed at the boy, managing to land a blow on him. Our hero began to fall, thinking that those men had betrayed him. As a result, the simulator came to an end. Lee reflected that the thought had crossed his mind at some point during that endless loop of infernal battle, wondering when all of it would finally end. Concluding that now, in this restarted turn, he was without that girl, wondering if once again he would die. Concluding it would happen countless times, him losing pointlessly, again and again. In the end, amid all that destruction, nothing remained. Without Scipia, he would have to fight alone from that moment on, and there was no reason to even consider receiving help from those men. Still, he wanted to know why those men kept fleeing, especially in a no-win battle like that. After that, simulation number 140 began, and that same old man announced that the enemy legions were advancing. Our hero looked up thoughtful, wondering if reinforcements had arrived, but the old man didn't understand, asking what he meant. Lee, in turn, asked why he was so surprised. He was simply asking whether reinforcements had arrived. The red-haired man watched the protagonist, astonished. The old man still didn't understand anything about those supposed reinforcements. Lee thought that it was expected, saying it seemed there were reinforcements available that even he wasn't aware of. Even a considerable force of reinforcements. He thought he didn't need to ask anymore. However, he wanted to know why they had hidden that information from him. Right after, our hero smiled, saying that this was the old man's plan all along. The red-haired one asked what Lee meant. Our hero said he had used the archers just to buy time, thinking it was only a strategy to push Lee to his limits, apparently waiting for something from him. But in truth, they only wanted to send him off as a sacrifice while they waited for more reinforcements, because what they really needed was just a clown dressed as a general. The scene returned to the present, with Lee saying there was no explanation for all the things they had done, thinking that from the very beginning, he was surrounded by people desperate to offer up their necks to that giant man from before. Hearing this, the old man was surprised, trying to come up with an excuse. Looking at the soldiers, Lee asked if the old man's name was Gallenberg and the red-haired one Joseph. Hearing his name, Joseph was taken aback. Lee in turn said that whatever their reasons or beliefs were, they could stop acting like hypocrites. After that, Joseph grew irritated. Staying had been an unavoidable decision, and besides that, he had no other choice. The protagonist was surprised, saying that's exactly why they had done what they did, because they believed there was no other option. All of it, except for one person, because he definitely knew who it was. And if he were in their place, he might not have been that different either, saying it was a good strategy. But as they all knew, he was the one who had to win that battle, concluding that from now on, they had abandoned the strategy of waiting for reinforcements. Hearing this, the soldiers were stunned. Joseph asked how he dared say something so ridiculous. In the next scene, Gallenberg drew his sword, asking if he thought that battle was some kind of joke. Lee thought those men were the kind of people who would consider fleeing before the battle even began, and yet they were bold enough to disregard the situation. But to him, not even death could release him from that endless war. A flashback played in his mind of all the times he had been defeated, thinking that was why, even if his body was torn apart, he still couldn't stop moving forward. Saying he wouldn't repeat himself, he ordered all the knights to gather at the castle gates. The soldiers remained silent. Then the scene shifted to the castle gate. Countless black knights were ready for battle. Next, Lee's companions were apparently preparing their horses, facing the gate from the inside. Gallenberg asked if the man had gathered all the horses. The other man replied yes, saying that was the plan. But even so, there was something. He began looking back, saying that one of the animals was resisting and refusing to move. Looking at the horse, Gallenberg seemed to recognize it, asking if he meant General Lee's horse, which was all the way in the back. With a threatening gaze, the horse began staring at Gallenberg. Right after, the protagonist began descending a set of stairs. The knights with their horses were already prepared for battle. Our hero asked if that was all. Gallenberg confirmed it was and asked what he was planning to do. Lee then ordered them to open it. Gallenberg was surprised, asking why they had to do that. Our hero pointed to the side, directly at that gate, ordering them to open it now. Starting to shout, he said that everyone should listen carefully because they were going to open that gate and then charge out, concluding that they would break through, using that momentum as a distraction while the enemy focused on attacking the wall. After that, there was more, because they would definitely advance to Black Wayne's base. An image of that man appeared in the protagonist's mind. He thought that man was definitely a monster. Finishing his statement, he said they would defeat Black Wayne and push back all the enemies, stating that this was the only way they could survive that battle. The scene changed to inside the stable, and the protagonist's horse was still there. At that very moment, it seemed to sense something. Then the scene shifted back outside the stable. A soldier asked Lee if he really expected them to go into that battle and come out alive. From afar, Joseph began laughing, asking if that was the plan and what the hell he was thinking, questioning if he had gone mad, if he wanted to die. Gallenberg called Joseph vice general, asking how he dared speak that way about the general. But Joseph said that with just that little force, Lee wanted to invade the enemy's base. asking if he was an idiot who couldn't even grasp the situation. But the protagonist said that, in fact, it was they who didn't understand anything, for they were deluded, thinking they would be spared after Lee was killed. Hearing this, Joseph remained silent. The same thing with those soldiers. Then the protagonist thought that, for that black monster, begging didn't matter, saying that it definitely wasn't going to work. At that moment, the barn gate broke down. The soldiers were surprised, not knowing what was happening. Then it was revealed that Lee's horse was standing in front of them. Joseph said that was definitely the general's horse, and Lee began to watch it. Joseph asked what he was doing, ordering them to catch that horse quickly. His companions began to do so. However, the horse started to move, attacking those two idiots. The other man also tried to grab the horse, but ended up being thrown into the air. Then someone threw some ropes over the horse, starting to tie up its head. The soldiers began to hold the horse, which kept trying to move. The protagonist, meanwhile, observed the situation. After that, he made a leap. Meanwhile, he held his sword. After that, he used it, beginning to cut all the ropes. One of Lee's companions watched him surprised. He said that if they just left it alone, he thought he'd be the first to be trampled to death by that horse. Then Gallenberg told them not to get closer because that was no ordinary horse. However, Lee wondered why it was acting so wild, because it seemed like it was trying to say something. The horse continued to watch our hero with a determined gaze. Then the scene changed to that gate. Outside it, the Black Riders were already starting to climb the castle. The horse seemed to observe the whole situation. Our hero, with a smile on his face, thought that he had already understood. Soon after, the horse began to run, heading straight toward Lee. Gallenberg said it was dangerous, thinking the boy couldn't die there. But at that moment, the horse passed by the protagonist. However, the boy had grabbed a rope. He started to pull it, apparently managing to restrain the horse, but still, it tried to move. It began to stomp all around. Even so, Lee kept holding the horse. He said that this was quite fun, asking if the horse felt the same as him, because he wanted to go mad on that bloody battlefield one more time, saying that even in that hellhole there was at least one creature a bit friendly, telling the horse to go with him until the end of that battle filled with death. Therefore, they should definitely kill the lion. Meanwhile, the horse kept watching the protagonist, who even so kept holding the horse with his rope. After that, the horse seemed to see our hero in a different way, apparently the image of its former master, and Lee was basically the same person. Thus, the horse, surprisingly, gave in, leaving the soldiers stunned by what they had witnessed. The same happened with Joseph. The horse then began to kneel. Joseph couldn't believe what he was seeing, because Lee had simply managed to tame the damn horse. Moments later, the scene shifted to Ryung, who was wondering what had happened. Again, the scene returned to the battlefield, and now the protagonist's soldiers were accompanied by horses. It seemed that this time they wouldn't betray. At the front line was our hero, still mounted on that same horse. He thought it was the first time he had ridden a horse, assuming that was how it was done, mentioning he felt no discomfort or fear of falling, being surprised, assuming that horse was adjusting to the protagonist's rhythm. After that, our hero smiled, saying it was just a horse, concluding he was fine so he could run freely, thinking that thanks to those heightened senses he had awakened, he no longer needed such concerns. After that, the horse began to prepare, starting to run even faster, and our hero's group kept approaching those Black Riders who were still climbing the tower. Lee then began to distance himself from his companions, going full speed on his horse. Meanwhile, he was holding his spear, thinking he should go all in. The scene shifted to the Black Riders, who looked sideways, confused by what they had seen, because the general, along with his soldiers, had simply appeared out of nowhere, starting to throw their spears, which hit most of the riders. The protagonist easily defeated one of them. In a matter of seconds, a huge number of soldiers was defeated. The fierce battle unfolded in that place. Countless people were killed, but still, there were countless enemies on the battlefield. Determined to achieve their goal, from afar their leader watched the war, prepared for anything that might happen. His soldiers kept trying to climb the tower, saying that soon it would be over for that castle, along with Lee's ruin. But at that moment, he remembered something, reflecting on the Reaper who had taken his left eye, memorizing that man's face, stating that the time had come to finally defeat his descendant, thinking he heard a rumor that his son had a reputation for being a miserable coward, concluding that if the rumor was true, that would be great, thinking he would just defeat him easily. A red aura began to envelop his body. Then the scene shifted to the battlefield. A spear had struck a soldier. Apparently, it was the spear of our boy, because it was surrounded by a blue aura. The Black Riders were surprised by the situation. Our hero appeared there with his horse, leaping onto the Black Riders while holding his sword. He was determined to defeat all those men. The other riders said it was an ambush, ordering them to stop the man. But it wasn't enough because the protagonist had already struck with his sword, defeating several enemies at once, all while remaining in the air beside his horse. After that, the horse landed on the ground, trampling one of the soldiers, headbutting another one as well. One of the enemies said the protagonist was alone, ordering not to retreat and that they should defeat him all at once. The riders charged toward our hero all at once. but even so, Lee remained determined, holding the reins of his horse, which seemed to understand the signal, starting to prepare to counterattack. Our hero after that grabbed his spear, beginning to use it to attack his enemies as well, swinging it all around him. The scene shifted to Black Wayne, who asked the Reaper's descendant not to disappoint him. Again, it returned to the battlefield, with countless soldiers receiving the protagonist's attack all at once. He thought it was only the beginning, all of it in the middle of that immense number of enemies. His companions riding on horseback observed from afar, surprised, saying the general had opened a path, ordering to follow him. Lee said that if they wanted to stay alive, they shouldn't fall behind, ordering them to go at full speed because they were heading directly for Black Wayne. However, it wouldn't be so easy because the Black Riders were still ahead. Our hero raised his sword along with his spear. An explosion happened right after that. Black Wayne observed the war from afar, wondering what that attack just now had been. At that moment, a group of horsemen arrived to speak with their general. Black Wayne asked what was going on. The soldiers said they were being ambushed by enemy troops. However, Black Wayne asked what kind of nonsense that was and who dared to attack his camp. The Black Rider said he didn't want to believe it either, but it was true, mentioning that the one leading them was none other than Lee. The man became enraged, saying that if he were lying, he would kill him. However, the black soldier said he was certain of what he had seen. Then, Black Wayne smiled and began to laugh loudly, wondering who was the trash that said he was a coward, stating that no sane person would even think of invading that place. Still, he couldn't believe that he had come personally, concluding that he should give him a gift. From afar, Black Wayne observed our boy's troops, and beside them was our hero as well. He thought it didn't matter if there were thousands or just dozens of them. They should try to stop him if they had the guts, but no matter what happened, he would keep moving forward toward that man. At that moment, one of the Black Riders began to blow his war horn. The soldiers held their position. Lee, watching the situation, was confused. Out of nowhere, several arrows began to fly, heading toward Lee. He remained motionless, then began walking with his horse again. From afar, he observed Black Wayne. He then gave a signal with his hand, directly at the protagonist. With a smile on his face, he said that he really was Lee. The boy kept watching Black Wayne, beginning to walk more and more in his direction, thinking that all he needed was that sword he was already familiar with. The soldiers, seeing the protagonist passing through their defenses, were surprised. Not only them, but the same happened with the scientists watching the simulation. Even so, Black Wayne remained motionless. Lee thought he still couldn't fully control the spark of power burning inside him. However, just a single moment was enough, begging for it to work, gathering everything at the tip of that sword. The boy then began to unleash a flurry of strikes on Black Wayne. He, with a smile on his face, said it was really good, because he should at least be excited so he could fully enjoy defeating him. The two then clashed, and a massive explosion occurred afterward. The Black Riders, desperate, watched the battle. Black Wayne was apparently having some sort of difficulty, being surprised by what he was seeing, because the boy had managed to block his attack. Precisely his attack, which was the messenger of anemia and the reincarnation of the lion. That little idiot had actually done it, leaving Black Wayne increasingly enraged, gripping his axe tighter and tighter, delivering another blow to our hero. He reflected that he had expected this, but even so, the enemy's strength was monstrous. Lee was also struggling greatly, thinking that in the end he was still pushed back, seeming to struggle to defend the strike. Black Wayne continued observing the situation. However, the protagonist said he still couldn't give up, managing to counterattack that blow. Black Wayne remained on his course. Lee thought that now that he had come this far, he couldn't stop. Black Wayne struck another blow at our hero, but the boy barely managed to defend. Even so, he took some of the hit, starting to fall from his horse. Still, the boy didn't give up, remaining on his feet, even without his horse, thinking that he still hadn't given up. In a matter of seconds, Black Wayne charged once more with his axe. Watching the situation, Lee thought that man was incredibly strong. He, with a smile on his face, kept watching the protagonist, trying to strike once more, but Lee managed to dodge with a leap. The enemy tried to strike again in the air, but Lee dodged once again. Black Wayne asked where that energy from before was and if he was done pretending to be like that other person. However, the protagonist didn't care, continuing to dodge the attacks, thinking that he really wanted to smash that man's face in, charging toward him again with a leap. Lee looked to the side, noticing there was a horse, heading toward it. Out of nowhere, he struck the horse, which then collapsed to the ground. At that moment, the boy was surprised, wondering where Black Wayne had gone, because he had simply vanished, supposing he might be above him. And when he looked up, Black Wayne was about to deliver another strike. Lee was surprised, reflecting that he thought he had gotten stronger before, but now he couldn't even move. That unbearable gap in their power felt like they weren't even the same species, wondering if he was starting with that slicing attack again. Even so, Lee didn't give up, charging toward Black Wayne, preparing to deliver his final blow. After that, the two once again crossed their weapons. Black Wayne said it was a shame, but this was the end for him. As a result, the protagonist's sword ended up breaking, and the boy had already become vulnerable. As he fell, he wondered if the battle would end like that and if that was the difference between the two of them. Black Wayne was about to deliver his final strike. The protagonist was already closing his eyes, thinking that normally everything ended with that critical attack, so he already knew what was coming next. However, if such a powerful strike were used repeatedly, even if he was the messenger of death, he would still get tired. That's why there was only one thing he had to do. And at that moment, the system announced that the simulator had been completed. Time passed, and the scene changed to a capsule. A flashback appeared again with the protagonist in front of Black Wayne, wondering if that monster was already tired. Even if he was a monster, if he kept using that attack, he would probably tire out. So that first turn strike had been his best, thinking that if he could endure for just 60 seconds, the enemy would reach his limit. Therefore, he had to survive that critical strike at all costs. Thus, the system announced the simulator had been reset, and moments later, Lee was already back in battle against Black Wayne. The monster was about to strike our hero. Then, an explosion occurred, but Black Wayne was surprised by what he saw, because Lee managed to defend the strike, thinking that he would just keep dodging and enduring every blow. Also, the enemy would keep launching attack after attack. The boy had died several times, and each time the simulator restarted right in that place. The protagonist didn't give up because he always kept doing the same thing, defending against every attack without striking back even once. But even then, it hadn't been enough. Black Wayne, watching Lee's movements, was surprised. Right after that, he delivered another blow, asking to make things more and more fun. Thus, Lee began advancing toward Black Wayne. About to deliver another strike, he thought there were only 30 seconds left to hold the enemy. The two then crossed their weapons. Black Wayne observed our hero, who apparently was having some kind of difficulty, but surprisingly managed to hold back Black Wayne's sword. He then charged once more at Lee, grabbing the poor boy by the head, hurling him far away, smashing him into the ground. Lee, meanwhile, was suffering. Then he began to receive a flurry of attacks. The protagonist, in his thoughts, stated there was just a little more to go, and the simulator restarted once again. Black Wayne had once again charged toward the boy. He, in turn, was holding off the attack. Still, he was having a very hard time. All just to hold off that man for only 60 seconds, thinking that, until he got tired, he had to keep doing this, because that battle would be the end. In the middle of that situation, Lee grew thoughtful, reflecting that, ever since he stepped into that hell, perhaps the outcome had already been written in the stars, alongside all the countless deaths he had endured, because they weren't just meaningless dog deaths either. Amid all of that, Lee said he just needed to hold on for 10 more seconds, enduring even if he felt like he would be killed. Lee, even while taking numerous hits, remained standing. Trying to endure, he thought there were only 9 seconds left. Black Wayne, meanwhile, seemed irritated that he couldn't land a single blow. Then, our hero smiled. After that, he let go of his weapon, throwing it toward Black Wayne. The boy thought there were only 7 seconds remaining. Then he placed his foot on Black Wayne's axe, charging toward the enemy, managing to grab his sword once again, leaping toward the man. But the enemy tried to retreat, surprised by what had just happened. Still, the protagonist was locked in, charging straight toward the man. He thought that losing a battle was simple, because he could just give up. But something else happened if he persisted, because the battle would simply continue. Then the protagonist delivered the final blow, sending the enemy flying off to Kingdom Come. Watching the situation, Black Wayne was stunned, bracing himself to defend. Lee charged once again, thinking that he had managed to endure the assault. All of it in that damn battle. Black Wayne stayed on the defensive, and the Black Riders, watching the fight, were completely shocked. The same happened with the scientists. Black Wayne wondered what was happening because he was losing. All to a boy he had underestimated because all he had was the reputation of being the Reaper's son, mentioning that he would never let that boy keep living, because if he just let him be, he would definitely become a disaster for the Empire soon, concluding that this was why that man had to be killed. Black Wayne approached his soldiers, asking what they were looking at because they should be charging at the protagonist, ordering them to cut off both of his arms. The soldiers began to do just that, charging toward Lee, who was apparently a bit wounded. But even so, he began to laugh, getting ready to defend himself. The soldiers, along with Black Wayne, were left stunned. Lee thought he was a general in every sense and couldn't believe he had actually asked for help, concluding that the enemy was no different from that petty trash. Hearing that, Black Wayne grew furious. Lee thought he had been living through that hell just to bring them down, saying he shouldn't try to run and should come at him with his big axe. Black Wayne grew more and more furious, and the soldiers were struck with fear because an explosion occurred. Black Wayne, along with our boy, were stunned by what had just happened. These companions had finally reached the front line, beginning to defeat all the remaining enemies. A Black Rider said they were ambushed by enemy troops, and several cavalrymen, packed on horses, appeared, charging toward all the enemies. Black Wayne then mounted his horse, thinking he would never forget that humiliation, watching the protagonist one last time. Then he began to flee. The same was done by the Black Riders, finally retreating. Thus, the protagonist was finally the victor of that battle after an immense number of simulator resets. And so our hero had finally exhausted his strength. Falling to the ground, he wondered if he would be able to save Sepia. Then someone appeared on a horse. A girl, surprised, asked if he was still alive. Our hero opened his eyes, still speaking about Sepia. Then that woman asked for transport to be prepared, because there was a wounded person there. Amid that situation, Lee began to lose consciousness, thinking that when his eyes opened again, he wanted Sepia to appear. Thus, time passed once again. A voice said that long ago, a girl left the battlefield. With 2 drops of tears, she left behind a ring with a promise of her return. Years passed, and the girl waited endlessly. But in the end, the girl, unfortunately, couldn't return to the battlefield, and the promise of the ring simply wasn't fulfilled. The scene shifted to another place. Our hero regained consciousness, thinking he had heard someone calling his name. Lee tried to move, but then realized he was chained. Looking around, he noticed he was back, but this time it was different, because besides being chained, some of his soldiers were watching him. The blonde girl appeared again, asking if he had come to his senses. The protagonist asked if, by any chance, he couldn't go back, and if it wasn't the end yet, but even so, he had managed to get through that hell. One of the soldiers tried to grab his sword, but the other Maria asked him to stop, because she assumed he still didn't understand the situation, since that was a chain used in the castle. Maria sat on a chair, ordering Lee to tell her everything he knew. Recognizing the woman, Lee asked if she was the girl he had seen on the press earlier, concluding that they should only start doing that after dying. Our hero seemed irritated, starting to try breaking free from those chains. The girl was surprised, thinking those were the chains that lifted the castle gate. The soldiers drew their swords, remaining alert at any moment. At that instant, the protagonist simply broke free from those chains. Leaving the knights stunned by what they had seen, they started defending themselves. Still, it wasn't enough, saying that man was a monster. Our hero seemed determined to do something, beginning to destroy that place, defeating several more of their soldiers. Then he grabbed a sword, striking down more of the knights. Our hero showed no mercy. The other girl watched in silence, asking if that was really Lee. Soon after, the protagonist grabbed Maria by the neck, saying that from now on, he would be the one asking questions, stating that he remembered her face because she was the girl he had seen in the L-log test room, and from that conversation he had with Ryeon. A flashback appeared then. Lee said he hadn't understood any of that before, so she better start explaining everything she knew because his patience was running out. In the middle of that situation, Maria thought the hero was insane. It wasn't an exaggeration to say he was on the same level as Black Wayne. He was definitely a 3rd-ranked knight, but still didn't know anything about that place. After that, our hero asked why no one in that place listened to him, grabbing Maria by the leg, saying that since he had gone to that world with her, if they both died, they would probably be reset. However, Maria didn't understand any of it, asking what he was talking about. The protagonist began squeezing the girl's leg harder and harder. She seemed to be in a lot of pain. Lee said she'd be fine since she'd be restarted anyway, and she just had to endure the pain until death. Lee gripped her leg tighter and tighter. The girl appeared to be in severe pain, and her screams could be heard from outside. The soldiers, hearing all of it, seemed confused. Beginning to peek inside the gate, the scene returned to the interior, and the protagonist said that this time it would be the other leg. But the girl begged him not to do it, saying she would tell him everything. Hearing that, Lee smiled. The girl said she had one condition, that he had to be her ally and help her fight. Lee kept listening in silence, asking if she thought she was in any position to negotiate with him at that very moment. The girl seemed desperate. Lee asked why she was doing all that for a mere game. Maria, surprised, asked if he really thought that was a game, but in fact, it wasn't. Lee asked what she meant, wondering if it wasn't actually a real game. Maria, while the protagonist held her, asked him to accept the first condition. Surprisingly, Lee accepted, thinking that he didn't care about anything except Sepia, so it didn't matter who he fought alongside. After that, the girl asked Lee to listen carefully, saying that what they were playing now wasn't a game, but a simulator built for military use. Hearing this, our hero was surprised. Maria said that specifically, it was for that spark of power he was using. In other words, it was a program to develop even more power. Hearing that, Lee became irritated, telling her to stop with that nonsense, because even if it was for that kind of power, it was still just an illusion inside a simulator. But she asked what would happen if that power also worked for Lee in the real world. However, Lee thought that was impossible. Still, the girl said the simulator made all of it entirely possible, since that was the reason and purpose behind the real simulator. But the branch manager, Bernard, and the team leader, Hyun, had misused it all, because there had been a report about an illegal supplier. That was why she entered the simulator, to investigate it all. Lee continued to listen to the entire explanation. The girl said that though it was a bit much for her to say, she had a small stake in the real simulator. After hearing the full explanation, Lee asked why he had entered and taken part in all of this. Because he had nothing to do with any military testing or illegal supplies. He was just a regular high school student who only wanted to play a more realistic game. Then the girl said that Lee was just another unlucky guy, randomly selected from among countless beta testers. Hearing that, our hero grew more and more irritated, asking if she really thought he would believe that. Then the girl no longer had a response. Lee continued holding her by the neck. Soon after, she said she had no idea why he had been chosen from among all the players, and even if they defeated her countless times, her answer would remain the same. Watching the situation, Lee grew increasingly furious. With a smile on her face, the girl asked if he had already figured it out, because, ignoring all the initial reasons, that simulator had been turned into a hell just to erase his existence, telling him to keep that in mind. Because to achieve that goal, the branch manager was even willing to sell his weapons to the devil. Then the scene shifted to another location. The manager told the team leader that his strategy to handle the situation should succeed, and Hyung said he would never disappoint him. Then he ended the call. Next, he started a call with another man who told the team leader that doing this was basically impossible. But Hyung told him to shut up, sync with his link, and upload the 9th special item. Placing the items into the capsule, he thought that now that things had come to this, he would have to eliminate him himself. He began initiating and entering the simulator. The scene shifted to the soldiers who had heard a woman scream, asking who those people were. They were surprised, realizing it was the general as he was in that place. Not only that, but he was accompanied by another woman. The soldiers, astonished, realized it was the princess. Hearing this, Lee was surprised. The girl, embarrassed, said that was her in that world. The soldier said that even so, everyone had been eagerly searching for the general. Lee, curious, asked why. Then the scene shifted outside the castle. The knights seemed relaxed, happy to have finally won that battle. One of the soldiers then noticed something, and the protagonist appeared at that place, leaving all of his companions overjoyed. They began shouting the hero's name because he had managed to defeat the messenger of death. Everyone raised their swords in the name of our boy. The blonde girl said he wasn't far from being an idol. Lee started watching those cheers, surprised. The girl apologized for interrupting, but said there was something he needed to know. Because if he truly wanted to leave that simulator, he not only had to defeat Black Wayne, but also behead him. Hearing that, our hero smiled, saying that from the moment he was dragged into that place, that was the answer he had been looking for. A flashback appeared in our hero's mind from the time he first entered the simulator. Back then, he didn't understand anything and was desperate, wondering how he could get out of the place. But now finally, he had a goal to fight for, concluding that he couldn't believe how many times he had heard that he had to fight from the beginning. But even so, it was just a cheap joke, not even a funny one. Thus, time passed once again, and the scene changed to another location. A hooded man began entering a tent. Black Wayne asked if he had come to that place to fix his ruined halberd, calling the hooded man a mage. Removing his hood, the man said that if the general required it, instead of repairing it, he could forge a new and stronger halberd. It was revealed to be Hyun, who said that the reason he had come so late at night was to deliver an order from the second prince, because he had a brilliant enough plan to secure victory in that battle. Black Wayne asked what he meant by that, and Ryung said he just needed to let his soldiers be the vanguard during tomorrow's battle. The scene shifted to a voice speaking about a girl who hadn't returned. Everyone said she was already dead, but still she could be felt. Far away on a battlefield, somewhere he was sure that girl might still be alive. So to a land where endless blood was shed and cries of pain still echoed, she could part into such a place. Only because of the promise from that specific day to reunite with the owner of the ring who had promised to return. That girl looked around, wondering what it was, supposing it could be a dream or even a hallucination, concluding that she was certain she had dreamed of this before. At that exact moment, an explosion occurred. Some knights seemed to be holding their weapons, and that girl just watched in silence. Those spears were then thrown. At the same moment, our hero woke up. The soldiers were confused about what had happened. The protagonist then stood up, starting to walk towards somewhere, apparently frightened by what had happened. A nurse arrived at the place, asking if Lee was okay. He, in the middle of that situation, wondered what had happened, because that dream felt like that girl was right in front of him. Right after, someone knocked on the door. It was revealed to be that blonde girl, saying she knew Lee was dealing with his love life, and she was sorry to disturb him at a time like that, but still, unidentified people had invaded that place at dawn today. Hearing this, the boy was surprised. Thus, the scene shifted to another location, now to some soldiers who were observing something. They began to approach a castle, precisely where the protagonist was. A soldier said he expected them to invade in waves as soon as the sun rose, and another soldier asked what they were. Lee watched the knights from afar, thinking that Black Wayne wouldn't show up, wondering what those soldiers were. Not only that, but they wore very peculiar clothing, and there were only 9 of them. The scene shifted to Black Wayne, asking if he believed that only those idiots would be enough to bring victory in this battle. Hyung in turn was also at the site, saying yes, because he would definitely bring the head of that descendant, thinking that at that moment he entered there, failure was not an option. Ordering them to advance all at once, the soldiers seemed determined and a purple aura began to surround them, beginning their march, advancing directly toward that castle. Lee, seeing all of this, was surprised. Black Wayne just watched in silence. The 9 enemies began to move into their battle positions. The protagonist's companions, seeing the movements of the other soldiers, said it even looked like a dragon. The blonde girl, seeing this, just watched surprised, and the Black Knights advanced more and more, going directly toward the castle. After that, they launched an attack on the gate. The soldiers were frightened by what had happened. However, it wasn't enough for the other knights because they continued attacking the gate. Each strike on the gate shook those walls. After some time, the wall began to crack, where shortly after they began to break through it successfully. However, it was obvious that the knights wouldn't let that happen, beginning to carry a stone, throwing it in the direction of those men. Then the other girl said it wasn't a dragon, but rather a hydra, and each of its heads was a separate living entity, which for sure was a true monster. Next, those knights with a leap seemed to advance more and more toward the castle. The girl alerted the soldiers, saying they were approaching again, ordering all troops to go directly to the castle gate because they would be massacred if the castle gate collapsed in that situation. At that moment, the soldiers began to do what the general girl had ordered, and the Black Knights continued to advance without hesitating even once. Surprised, Black Wayne just observed the situation. The protagonist, meanwhile, was doing the same, saying it would be a head or no heads. The other girl looked back. Lee said he just needed to kill them all. The soldiers, surprised, asked what Lee was doing. The boy, after that, began to fall from that gate. The general, surprised, asked what the hell Lee was doing. Soon after, the boy supported himself on the castle wall, managing to return to his normal position. After that, he kicked a stone, throwing it toward the other Black Knight, hitting him squarely, but still it wasn't enough, because he managed to break it with his sword. Observing the situation, our hero smiled, striking a blow with his sword at the knight in the front, initiating a sequence of attacks on those 9 Black Knights, who apparently suffered some kind of damage. But still, the protagonist kept attacking each one of them. After a while, Lee finally paused his strikes. Black Wayne and the other girl were surprised by what had happened. Then the soldiers began to cheer for Lee to win. However, the other girl observed the situation, surprised, thinking that the Hydra was an existence that should not have appeared in that simulator in the first place. Concluding that this must be a special product from Hyun meant to eliminate the protagonist who had awakened unexpectedly. Wondering what kind of battles Lee had gone through all this time, our hero was in the midst of an immense number of soldiers, and a shadow mounted on a horse was approaching him. It was revealed to be Black Wayne, who asked Hyun if this was the reason he asked for the vanguard position, and if it was just to show this vision to the enemy. However, Hyun asked him to be quiet, saying that all of this was just the beginning, because from now on he would continue to present him with a real hell that would never end. Using part of the soldiers, he apparently performed some kind of magic. The other girl was surprised, wondering if that was the true nature of the Hydra. At that moment, some drops of blood seemed to surround the protagonist. Surprisingly, from them, a human emerged. Lee, shocked, asked if they had mobilized zombies. Black Wayne realized it was an unbreakable puppet, saying he had brought a very interesting toy. Then that blood finally took the form of a complete human, beginning to advance for the protagonist. With his sword, he was about to strike. The other girl just watched, surprised, thinking that it simply wasn't possible, ordering Lee to stop, thinking that if she wasn't mistaken about what she had just seen, no matter how strong he had become, because he could never win a battle against them. Hyun watched the fight from afar, saying that even if he discovered the truth, that would be the end for Lee, something that couldn't be changed. The scene shifted again to our hero, who continued battling that monster, raining down a blow with his sword, seemingly having some effect. However, the boy was surprised by what he saw. More soldiers appeared on the battlefield, advancing directly toward the boy. He then took his defensive stance, managing to block all those attacks. Then he began to counterattack, managing to defeat a few more soldiers. His companions observed the fight, surprised. Still, it wasn't enough, because the boy had much more to do. Meanwhile, his strength was slowly being depleted. Black Wayne, along with his companions, watched the fight, surprised, realizing that their allies were being gradually wiped out. However, the other 9 knights remained standing, managing to land a direct hit on the protagonist. The other men took advantage of the situation and did the same, finally managing to defeat our hero. A long time passed after his simulator had reset 613 times. The other girl said these weren't mere copies at the same level as the NPCs he had faced until now. Lee, meanwhile, remained silent. The girl said that according to strange rumors circulating in the village, they were immortal soldiers, and she was truly surprised because she still couldn't believe that the branch manager, Lee Hyun, was really a monster. Moreover, that face she was seeing was quite peculiar, because it belonged to someone who had disappeared in the past, the genius knight called Arslan. The one beside him was named Medici, and the other, Vadatek. Lastly, there was one named Kundo. All 9 had disappeared unexpectedly in the past. They were rankers known as absolute geniuses, stating that even if Lee were a 3rd-rank master knight, it was impossible for him to fight them all alone. The protagonist, hearing this, remained silent. Then he asked if not him, who else would stop them. Hearing this, the girl fell silent, and the soldiers did the same. Observing the situation, the girl wondered if she or those men, frozen with fear, could really do it, because it was absurd. Our hero kept looking at the woman. She thought that apparently she had something to do, and even if it was reckless and shameful, the only one she could trust to face the hell was Lee, because he was the only person capable of doing it. Then the girl took a necklace, asking the protagonist to keep it. The boy looked at it, surprised, recognizing that item. She said it was more than just a pendant, as she had been keeping it for 7 years to use in an emergency, and it was called a Terra crystal. Lee was surprised, asking why she was giving him something so important, and the girl said it was meant to be used at a time like this. This was a desperate situation in which if he fell, she would die too, so she had no choice but to give her all in trust in the protagonist. Hearing that, he was surprised, thinking that there was only one person who had acted like that in that place, which was specifically Sepia. With a smile on his face, the boy thought that meant he wasn't alone after all, and taking the pendant, he began to descend onto the battlefield, heading straight toward those 9 black knights. Beginning to look around the battlefield. Without wasting time, the men charged toward the protagonist. He, while holding that pendant, thought it felt so vivid, because that wave of strength was twisting there like a will, which was different. Watching the battle, the girl was surprised. Lee thought that, although maybe not as much as him, that girl must have also been truly desperate to survive that hell. And that was probably why she gave him that pendant. The boy began to charge at those knights, throwing the pendant into the air, shattering it with his sword, telling them not to get in his way anymore. An explosion occurred right after. The protagonist struck that knight. Black Wayne, seeing the situation, remained silent. Hyung, seeing what had happened, was surprised, because one of the 9 knights had simply been defeated. Lee observed the situation, landing another blow on the next knight, asking if he could still keep regenerating. Blood then began to spread. Hyung thought that even the special product he had created was turned into red sand, not believing that the data had been irreversibly destroyed. Growing extremely angry at that situation, wondering how Lee dared to push him that far. Thus, the man began to use a ring, saying he would definitely put an end to him. After that, he vanished. The scene changed to another place, and the man was already wearing his hood, saying he would definitely kill the protagonist. It was revealed that the man was standing right in front of Sepia. She, meanwhile, remained unconscious. The nurse, surprised, noticed the man and asked who he was. He said she was just an insignificant NPC, and for that reason, should stop bothering him. Then the scene shifted to the protagonist's soldiers, who were still cheering for him to win. The other girl was surprised, thinking that even using her pendant, the boy was still a monster. Lee, for his part, remained standing on the battlefield. At that moment, he was surprised by something. The girl also seemed to have noticed it. At that same moment, a soldier appeared, telling the princess that something had happened in the infirmary, because there had been an enemy ambush precisely in that place. An explosion followed. Ketchup began to spread through the area. The protagonist, witnessing the situation, was shocked, beginning to shout Sepia's name. Moments later, our hero was already at the scene, stunned by what he had seen. Realizing Hyung was there, he said it had been a long time since he'd seen Lee, claiming it was the same for Miss Maria, stating he would also take Sepia with him, and that obviously he couldn't promise she would remain unharmed. Seeing the situation, Lee became extremely frustrated, grabbing his sword and charging at the man, striking an attack at him, but the man had simply disappeared. Our hero, frustrated, said he was not a master knight, much less a direct descendant of a general's bloodline, as he was in fact just pathetic, an idiot who couldn't even stop someone precious from being taken right in front of him. Maria then asked if that lady knight was really that precious to him. Hearing that, Lee continued to look at Maria. She said he had helped her to the point of throwing himself into the middle of several enemies, even if it meant risking his entire life. Then the scene shifted to another location. Someone seemed to be kicking a person. It was revealed to be Hyun. Sepia, meanwhile, remained unconscious. Hyun asked what identity she had, if she could be a hacker or even an irregular. The girl, meanwhile, remained silent. Sepia then woke up, asking what he was so afraid of, questioning whether the higher-ups from the outside world had any real control over his life. Hyun, surprised, wondered how she could know that and how much more she knew. Sepia, in turn, said that maybe Hyun was afraid that that person might appear in that place. Hyun then became very angry, telling the girl to shut up, because being afraid was definitely far too optimistic a thought, since the moment Lee entered there to save her, he would definitely kill him, ensuring that none of them would be found in any corner of that world. Thus, the scene shifted to outside the tents, and several soldiers were listening to what was happening there. Hyun thought there wasn't much left, as no one had ever reached the 1000th scenario. Once she fell into that trap, she wouldn't be able to resist death. Then the scene shifted to our hero. The girl, meanwhile, wondered how important that woman was for the hero to act that way, asking if he was still going to invade that place. The protagonist then smiled. Maria, in turn, said that if that was his will, she wouldn't stop him. And if that was the path he would follow, then they should be allowed to follow it too. Observing the situation, Lee remained silent. Realizing they weren't lying, he said it would be a path with no return, asking if, even so, they would still follow him. Another soldier said that to begin with, they would have died long ago if it weren't for Lee. Not only that, but each of them had a reason, wives, children, or even the love of their life, begging to be told that they fought to the end to return. Hearing this, Lee was surprised, reflecting that he had always thought he was the only one fighting that way, but all the people he'd ignored all this time felt the same. Then Maria said she knew that bastard mage better than anyone, so she was sure he was hiding in the abandoned warehouse. concluding that after they invaded, while they distracted their attention, the protagonist had to save her and escape as fast as possible. Lee, for his part, was surprised, wondering if Maria would also go. She thought she didn't know exactly why, but if anything happened to Lee, she would truly collapse. Not just the castle, but everything around it. Then our hero removed his cloak. The scene shifted to another place, with the soldier asking if they really thought an enemy general would come to save a useless girl. The scene changed again to the protagonist, heading toward that fortress. A black knight had already noticed this, but it was too late because Lee was already accompanied by all his soldiers. The black knights were shocked by what they saw. The scene changed to inside the fortress, with the soldier saying that would be the last day she would see the descendant who came to save her. But Lee, meanwhile, kept approaching the fortress. Black Wayne, in turn, seemed to have already noticed the situation, saying that finally that descendant had arrived. A battle was already taking place there, and the protagonist began attacking some soldiers, and the knights inside the fortress said that the descendant had already shown up, ordering the defense unit to advance. An explosion followed. A knight asked what the commotion was. Sepia, meanwhile, remained silent. A flashback appeared in her mind of the girl walking through the middle of a battlefield. After that, she had arrived apparently in a village. Collapsing in the middle of the street, unconscious. A carriage, meanwhile, was passing by. The girl, little by little, closed her eyes. About to lose consciousness, someone approached her. Surprisingly, handed her a coin, asking if she was okay. The girl looked up to see who it was. It was revealed to be the protagonist, who, with tears on his face, asked who she was. Sepia, in turn, kept watching Lee with tears on her face. Then the scene shifted to another place, returning to the present with Sepia crying. The soldier asked what that was and if she was crying because she was afraid that Lee might be killed. At that moment, an explosion occurred in that place. Another knight appeared on the scene, surprised by what had happened. It was revealed to be our hero, beginning to destroy the entire place, defeating countless soldiers in a matter of seconds, and meanwhile shouting for Sepia, asking where she was. The girl, meanwhile, watched the protagonist. The flashback appeared with a voice saying that, in the middle of a battle, a boy was summoned to the emperor's castle, and the reason was unknown. The girl said that from now on, he would be the lord of that castle. After some time, our hero was already wearing armor, and what awaited the boy in that castle was a cold-hearted lady, the corpse of a dead emperor, who had the same face as him. The other woman began watching the protagonist, saying that if he didn't do it, then the one he loved would be killed in his place, asking what he would choose. The boy knew it was something he could never reject, even though it was an arrogant proposal. Then Lee said he would become the emperor. However, before that, he had one condition, because that ring should be given to that girl. With that obviously broken farewell, he finally became the emperor. The scene shifted to another place, where an old woman asked him not to be sad, because if his memory disappeared, the pain would disappear with it. Right after, she appeared and began casting a spell, and Lee felt something different. The scene changed again to another location, with our hero asking who the hell she thought she was. Sepia, in her child form, was still watching our hero. A long time passed after that, and Lee no longer remembered that girl, and eventually he became the emperor. After that whole damn flashback, the scene finally returned to the present, with the protagonist defeating those soldiers, shouting once again for Sepia. The girl continued watching our hero. The ropes binding her then tore apart. Without wasting a second, Lee embraced the girl, asking if she was okay and if she was hurt anywhere. Sepia, meanwhile, said nothing, thinking it didn't matter, even if he couldn't remember her, because she had always been the woman who chose to protect him by his side. More flashbacks appeared in Sepia's mind from when she first started learning swordsmanship. The scene shifted to another location with a door opening. The protagonist, along with his mother, were surprised. Sepia appeared there, dressed in her armor, thinking that even if only as the emperor's escort knight, being by his side was already enough. Time passed, and amid those seemingly endless days, a black beast ended up invading the place, trampling everything around it. Under its claws, in the end, fell a man, who was as strong as a god. The protagonist's heartbeat had gradually slowed, then disappeared as if it had never existed. Sepia's tears once again flowed endlessly. Then someone asked the girl not to cry, and an old woman began watching Sepia, saying that there was still one method to save the man, leaving the girl stunned by what she had heard. Then that old woman struck her staff, and a sort of magical circle appeared. The old woman said he would need to forget everything there and live a new life in another world, in another place. Sepia asked if she could go too. The old woman then said she would give her one chance. At the moment the protagonist faced danger, Sepia would have the right to protect him by his side beyond the boundary of worlds. Hearing that, Sepia smiled. Then she thanked the old woman. Thus, the scene shifted to the present, with Sepia thinking that was already enough. A flashback of that old woman appeared in her mind. The scene then shifted to a building. A car seemed to approach the location. Someone got out of the car, and several men appeared to be bowing to an old woman. She then entered the building. In front of her, several people lay on the ground. The security guard was surprised by everything that had happened, but bowed his head when that old woman began to approach. Observing the situation, the old woman said that meant that man had truly done many horrible things. Meanwhile, an old man was approaching an elevator. The other old woman also called out to the man, ordering him to be dragged away. The guards did what the woman had ordered. The man, desperate, said he didn't know what rumors she had heard to do this, but still begged her to listen to him first, beginning to plead for mercy. However, the old woman didn't want to hear it, asking where Hyun was. The guard said it was exactly as she had predicted, because the man was currently inside the simulator. Without wasting time, the old woman said she had to hurry, so there would be no more children crying. The scene shifted again to the protagonist holding Sepia in his arms, saying she must be tired, but they needed to leave quickly, mentioning that the army was waiting for them. At that moment, Sepia regained consciousness, saying she was very happy, leaving our hero surprised by what he had heard, thinking that beyond Sepia, he had his own army of people who believed in him and entered the portal by his side. Lifting the girl in his arms, our hero said they needed to return together with their companions, all of them, without leaving a single person behind because he was going to bring everyone back. Sometime later, our hero said they needed to return to the fortress as quickly as possible. However, with tears on his face, the other soldier asked for just the two of them to go, leaving Lee surprised by what he had heard. The other soldier asked him to go back home. At that moment, his companions had been struck. It was revealed that a horde of black mics was in the area, also surrounding Maria, who was at that location. Hyun then appeared at the scene asking if Maria was trying to simulate an assault using that fragile paper army. Hearing that, Maria said nothing more. From afar, someone was watching the entire situation mounted on a horse. It was revealed that Black Wayne was also there. He began observing the protagonist alongside Sepia. Moments later, the two stood face to face. Black Wayne said that if only he hadn't come there, at least more people would still be alive that night, concluding that it was truly a pity. Maria looked to the side, surprised that Black Wayne had appeared. She thought the reason he was called the Nemean Lion wasn't just because of his immense strength, but also due to his exceptional cunning. However, he was different now as he was at the limit of his physical strength, holding on through sheer willpower. All of it after giving his all in the battle against the Hydras. For him, who was holding on thanks only to his will, those words from Black Wayne, blaming him for his comrades' deaths, were truly suffocating. And after that, the protagonist charged for the man, which became a crushing burden for him. Maria continued watching that scene, wondering what might happen if the two fought in the middle of that place. Because no matter how many times it happened, Lee always kept dying. Then Sepia asked Lee if the weight of his comrades' lives was truly heavy for him, or if it was the wishes they wanted to fulfill through him. Hearing all that, Lee remained silent, recalling all the wishes his soldiers had. Reluctantly, the protagonist answered yes. Sepia said that he truly could feel the weight of all their wishes. Then the girl grabbed the hero's sword. He asked what she was doing. Sepia, in turn, released the sword, saying that instead of being a burden on his shoulders, it should actually be a wing. Maria, meanwhile, watched their conversation from afar, wondering how Sepia could seem so calm in front of that boy. Meanwhile, the protagonist simply listened to what Sepia was saying. Soon after, Lee looked at his cloak, realizing that all his comrades' wishes were engraved upon it. Then, our hero smiled. Black Wayne observed the situation, wondering if the boy could truly smile in a place like that. Sepia, in turn, continued speaking, asking the boy to follow that hope. After that, she released the hero's arms, falling unconscious in the middle of that battlefield. The protagonist begged her to say something, but the girl was already without strength. Lee, for his part, said that he already understood what she was trying to say. Then, he returned to the battlefield, standing face to face with Black Wayne, beginning to walk toward the man. With a threatening gaze, he stared at him. Black Wayne, apparently, was feeling something, thinking that he felt no fear nor hostility, not even the Terra power. The protagonist kept watching his enemy calmly. Black Wayne wondered what he might be thinking. But in any case, now he was alone. Drawing his axe, he said that the exhausting war would finally end. He began advancing toward Lee, but the boy surprisingly remained very calm. Hyun, for his part, observed the battle from afar, wishing for the protagonist's death. Then the scene changed to another location, where a weapon was being fired. Some people had already been killed. The security officer said that from that moment on, access privilege to Korea's E-Log simulator would be revoked, ordering everyone in the control room to be detained until specific disciplinary action was determined. Then the old woman from before appeared at the scene, asking what the current situation inside the simulation was. But apparently there was no good news, because a worrying situation had occurred, leaving the old woman shocked by what she had heard, realizing that countless things had happened to those children, thinking that it was definitely a cruel fate for them. The scene returned once more to the battlefield, with Black Wayne launching an attack at our hero, but he managed to block the blow, and surprisingly remained calm in the middle of that battle. But for Black Wayne, it was different, as he was shocked by everything the protagonist was doing. The same was true for Hyun, who couldn't understand how Lee was managing to block all those attacks. Maria observed the battle, focused, wondering how he could block that blow as if it were nothing, even though he was a third-rank Master Knight, wanting to know who Lee really was. In the protagonist's thoughts, he wondered what he was doing because, in truth, he didn't feel any weight in his sword, nor even Black Wayne's attack. A man grew very angry, asking what the boy was planning all those tricks. But Lee simply focused on the battle, remaining silent. He managed to dodge all of Black Wayne's strikes. Apparently, he had even forced the man to retreat. But pressing forward once more, Black Wayne shouted at him not to be an idiot, demanding that he activate his Terra power. Swinging his axe again, he struck at the protagonist. But within seconds, Lee vanished, reappearing elsewhere. Amidst the chaos, Black Wayne grew increasingly furious. He activated an ability with his axe. Yet still, he couldn't land a single hit on our hero. Still, Black Wayne didn't give up, launching a relentless sequence of attacks. However, none of them worked. Each blow missed. Growing more irritated, he demanded the protagonist charge at him, but Lee vanished again, this time reappearing above some Black Knights. Black Wayne wondered what was happening. He couldn't even graze the hem of that man's cloak. In a matter of seconds, our hero stopped moving, asking aloud what this so-called Terra really was. Black Wayne, stunned, wondered when Lee had managed to get in front of him, and in that instant, Lee landed a clean hit. Maria and Hyung were both shocked by what they saw, because Black Wayne, after that blow, collapsed to the ground, apparently wounded by the attack, frustrated by everything that had happened. And at that same moment, our hero vanished again, reappearing once more in front of the man. Not only that, he also defeated the Black Knights who were nearby. Then Lee asked if Terra was the power to kill or trample to dominate someone. In desperation, Black Wayne tried to land another blow on Lee, but the boy easily dodged, raising his sword to attack once more, striking Black Wayne, who was thrown far back. Lee asked if Terra was a sensation from another world that rises from the depths of one's consciousness to face a formidable foe. But Black Wayne could no longer respond. He was too badly wounded. The soldiers, along with Maria, were stunned by what they had witnessed. Maria wondered what was happening, thinking that if Lee went beyond that limit, perhaps he would never be able to return. Sepia watched the battle in silence. Hyun, meanwhile, was desperate, shouting for Black Wayne to get up, thinking that even if he was just a mere copy, he still couldn't die, ordering him to get up immediately. Even if he had to risk his life, he would kill that boy. With a cold stare, the protagonist watched Black Wayne, who, frustrated, wondered how he couldn't defeat that boy, just a dumb kid like him. Then Lee said that the power they were using was something impossible for ordinary knights to even think of challenging. Black Wayne, confused, asked what he meant by that. Lee said they had overcome the fear of facing such terrifying and absolute power, that the precious lives which should have returned to their families were instead entrusted to him before disappearing, which meant they had truly been willing to sacrifice themselves, concluding that there was an unshakable army holding him up from behind. Hearing that, Black Wayne was stunned. Raising his sword, Lee said that whether it was Terra or something else, it no longer mattered, because the only thing left to do was kill Black Wayne and then go home. That this was the reason for all of them to finally return home together. In the midst of it all, Black Wayne still didn't give up, clutching his axe. He struck the ground with it. An explosion followed. The axe then began to glow. Lee, surprised, realized he couldn't reach the man. A mysterious force began to emerge, and Black Wayne started to scream. Apparently, he was managing to amplify his attributes. However, his axe began to crack. As an act of sacrifice, Black Wayne said that the protagonist would go down with him, leaving everyone around stunned by what was happening. Lee, however, remained silent, watching everything, and a blinding light filled the area. The same thing was happening outside. The other security officers said he thought they should find a way to stop the simulator, but the old woman asked them not to act, because interfering recklessly when everything was already overloaded would only place that child's life in even greater danger, concluding that the only thing they could do was keep watching, hoping that our hero could escape from that hell by his own strength. Then the scene returned once more to the battlefield, with Lee determined, wanting badly to win. Maria, meanwhile, seemed to be trying to stop something. In the middle of that moment, Lee thought he couldn't get any closer to that massive flame. With a smile on his face, Black Wayne said that with all of this, he would finish off the protagonist. Hyun, meanwhile, was just watching with a smile on his face, thinking that even that moment of death where everything appears will adjust the restart time, without leaving a single bit of his heart behind, concluding that everything will burn. Meanwhile, Lee outside the capsule seems to be feeling some kind of pain. Sometime later, the simulator had already restarted 756 times, and Lee thinks that it doesn't matter how many times he continues to burn, or even how many times he dies, much less how many times he starts over. He simply couldn't escape that hell, but still says that it won't be able to break him inside. Later, the simulator had already restarted 997 times, and Lee thinks he will not be turned to ashes, all because he has the wing that everyone entrusted to him. The scene returns to the outside with the guard asking what was happening. The protagonist, meanwhile, seemed to be a bit different, and a blue aura begins to envelop his body. Moments later, the simulator had restarted a total of 1,000 times, and something unknown appears behind our hero. And the guard outside that place says that is the appearance of the 8th Apostle. With that power, the protagonist begins to attack that immense number of Black Knights. The old woman just watches from her monitor, thinking that poor child was going through all that. However, for Lee, who was inside that battle, he only has the desire to end it by defeating Black Wayne. So the battle remains and continues. Maria, along with those Black Knights, also observed in silence. But Maria then begs the protagonist to stop, saying that if he goes any further, he will not be able to return. However, Lee with that look does not seem willing to give up, continuing to unleash a sequence of blows on Black Wayne. Moments later, a ring seems to begin to crack. In a matter of seconds, Hyung's ring is destroyed. Frustrated, he says he can't believe a high school kid like him ruined his plans and ended up becoming the 8th apostle, ordering to stop with those jokes. He starts screaming Lee's name, calling him a loser. Then the scene cuts to outside that place. The capsule had finally released our hero, who in turn begins to levitate. The scene goes back into the simulator again, and our hero seems to be in a trance. With a cold stare, he observes his opponent, preparing his strike even outside the simulator, and he repeated it inside the simulator, stating that this will be the final blow to defeat Black Wayne. After that, he lands a punch on the man, who takes the hit directly. An explosion happens after that. A huge light begins to envelop the entire place. The knights are surprised by the whole situation. Hyung, frustrated, says he shouldn't have entered that simulator, stating he should get out immediately. But at the same moment, another person appears in the place, and an old woman orders him to stop and not even think about doing that. Hyung recognizes the woman, calling her the 4th elder, asking how she is able to enter the simulator. Because if she is there because of those rumors, he states that it was all done under the branch manager's orders. But right after, the old woman approaches the guy, saying that everything was already fine, mentioning she couldn't stand hearing his screams anymore. At the same instant, Hyung begins to disintegrate, leaving only dust behind. Then the scene goes outside the capsule. Hyung had apparently passed away. The scene returns again to the simulator with Maria observing the battle. The protagonist remains standing without moving a muscle. Maria, in turn, is surprised to realize that Lee was still alive. However, the boy simply does not give any response. At that moment, the old woman appears, saying there isn't much time before his body collapses. Then our hero begins to feel the post-battle effects. With tears on her face, Maria begs the old woman to save the protagonist, because it must still be possible since he hasn't reached 1,000 deaths yet, even if it were necessary to seal his death. The old woman places her hand on Maria's head, saying that if she wants to protect someone, she should get stronger instead of crying. Right after, Maria looks to the side, and Sepia begins to approach Lee. The old woman was also seeing that, saying that even if his entire body is shattered and broken just like that, those steps will still move toward that person. At the same instant, the protagonist opens his eyes, thinking that someone was approaching. Out of nowhere, Lee begins to hallucinate, thinking that place is very familiar. Not only that, but there's a person who's always waiting for him. Recognizing that it is Sepia, our hero says that he is back. With a smile on his face, he begins to watch her. After that, he approaches the girl, running into her arms, who, in a matter of seconds, falls unconscious. Sepia begins to whisper something in the protagonist's ear, saying that once again she wished to protect him. Sepia then calls for the elder, who questions whether she knows there's a price for a miracle. The old woman starts to explain, but Sepia says that price doesn't matter, because if she can be wherever that guy is, that would be enough. Hearing this, the elder agrees, but also says that it includes Sepia's memories. If the girl didn't care about that, as long as Lee survived. Maria, meanwhile, watches closely. The elder approaches the two, agreeing to do it. And at that very moment, a light begins to envelop the three. Then a long time passes and the scene shifts to the remains of the battlefield. The castle and all the surrounding places were completely destroyed by that catastrophe. Only a minimal number of soldiers remained, yet Maria still stands tall. With that, the system announces that the simulator had finally come to an end. Then a light appears at the end of the tunnel. Someone looks out the window thinking it was snowing, and it's revealed to be the protagonist. Thinking that a month ago he had an accident 8 kilometers from a house after the ceremony, and at that moment it was also raining. That's what his parents and the doctors said. He had been unconscious for a month and had lost part of his memories. But still, those swollen muscles don't make sense, much less those calloused hands. Wondering if he had really just been lying there all that time. Then the scene shifts to outside that place. A girl was watching the building. It's revealed to be Sepia. Our hero also spots the girl, apparently recognizing her face. At the same moment, he leaves his room and starts running toward her. Meanwhile, she was just starting to leave a car, leaving the protagonist alone in that snow. The old woman inside the car asks if it's really okay to part ways like that, because after this, they'll never meet again. But Sepia says that someday they'll see each other again. So for her, it was already fine. Hearing this, the old woman simply smiles, and so they finally start to drive away. Lee then looks to the side and finds a kind of necklace. The boy approaches it, realizing there was a ring on it. A flashback appears with the protagonist saying that from now on and forever, he would be Sepia's knight. And hearing that, the girl gives a smile. The two then begin to stare at each other. The scene returns to the present with Lee saying that he knows that girl and doesn't know how, but that someday they will meet again. And that's the end of the video. Man, what an incredible story. So if you liked it, leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. That's it, and thanks.